Interface starts with an experiment. In 1943, a military ship stationed in Philadelphia generates an electromagnetic field that is supposed to turn the vessel invisible. What happens instead leads to the greatest paradigm shift in human history. The ship gets teleported to New York, causing most of the crew members to get horrifically fused into its metal hull. One of them suffers a different fate. He's launched into the air and disintegrated into nothingness. As his physical form starts to recompose, jet planes fly in and try to gun him down. This liberates a new wave of energy that washes over the entire Earth in mere seconds, forever changing reality as we know it. A mysterious substance dubbed cerebral electricity is now suddenly made visible and tangible to humanity. It brings strange and surreal creatures and alters the way our world looks and functions. It is in this bizarre dimension of monsters, transhumanist technocrats, and all-powerful androids that a giant spaghettified pink clown and a seemingly immortal mute man set off on a journey to find out the truth about their past and decide the direction of their future. Come along with me in this attempt to deconstruct the story, themes, and style of what is my favorite animated series on YouTube, Interface. If you have never seen or heard of Interface, it probably sounded like I was having a stroke. This garish Microsoft Paint-looking fever dream is the brainchild of Justin Tomchuk, aka Umami, a Canadian musician, animator, scriptwriter, and overall creativity machine. Interface started all the way back in 2017 and reached its epilogue after 24 episodes on October 17, 2021. The full series is basically a feature film, clocking in at about 1 hour and 57 minutes. And as you can see, both the single episodes and the full release have garnered an impressive amount of views. Interface can be called by all rights a certified YouTube classic, and I'm far from the first creator to make a video about it. I decided to throw my hat in the ring because, well, first of all, it's an amazingly inspiring project and I just want to gush about it, but also because I've seen a lot of people express the idea that Umami's work is incomprehensible, random, or purposefully abstruse, and I want to push back against that sentiment. While it is clear that there is a strong emphasis on surrealism and absurdism in Interface, the main plot is very much coherent. And while its ultimate meaning might be open for interpretation, like many respectable works of art, it establishes distinct themes that the viewer is invited to pick up on. It doesn't defy meaning, it leaves room for you to engage with and reflect upon it. While reading some of the comments on the series, I got flashbacks to Pergoliminal by Your Local Breadman, where a lot of people were either too quick to give up on trying to find the deeper themes of the series by deeming it too random, or the exact opposite, too quick to theorize and end up kinda missing the forest for the trees. Just like Pergoliminal, Interface is a very unconventional work of art in its style, structure, and ideas, and so it also requires a certain degree of openness and flexibility from the viewers to be enjoyed to the fullest. So let's start at the very beginning of the series to get a taste of what Interface is even like. The first episode is absolutely iconic by now. It features a smoking man in a blue suit standing in front of a store and looking at the mannequins who seem to have static in their eyes. All of a sudden, this beautiful creature noodles itself onto the scene. It makes the man drop his cigarette, and instead of saying hi, good morning, or how are you, like a normal person, just straight up jumps into the story of its transformation.
The year was 1943. Our ship was stationed in Philadelphia and was equipped to generate an electromagnetic field that would make us invisible to the enemy. What happened instead? We were teleported to New York. And in that process, my shipmates fused to the hull of the ship, embedded in the metal, screaming for help. I was destroyed. Forced to regain my physicality.
It recounts the incident I already told you about at the beginning, which is a direct reference to the so-called Philadelphia experiment. This was a real hoax created by Carl M. Allen, who claimed to have seen the Navy try to make a ship, the USS Eldridge, disappear. He recounts that the ship stationed at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard suddenly vanished in a greenish fog. According to Allen, it teleported all the way to Norfolk, Virginia, 200 miles away, to then reappear in Philadelphia. Which, if he was there looking at it, how could he know that it went all the way to Norfolk? Anyway, when it warped back, he says that some of the crew members were fused to the ship's hull, just like we see in Interface, while others had gone mad or disappeared. As you can imagine, this whole thing
is totally made up.
So we'll get into the themes of the project later on, but for now just know that the Philadelphia experiment is used here to represent great historical shifts. Things like the Industrial Revolution or the Digital Revolution, something that changes how humanity lives and views the world on a fundamental level.
The Philadelphia experiment is more like a metaphor for how like the Industrial Revolution sort of spurred the innovations that led to the internet and stuff, and now it seems like the whole world's so different from what it was before the 20th century, you know? It's like completely different.
To make things easier, I'll also tell you that this pink tagliatella is Mischief, and he's basically Umami's main mascot at this point, while the other guy in a blue suit is Henrik, our main protagonist. We'll learn more about both of them as we keep going. The second episode picks up right after Mischief's little story. He morphs into a bus and tells Henrik to get in, saying that he can take him anywhere. You'll start to notice that Henrik is awfully quiet, never answering Mischief's questions. He will, in fact, not speak for the whole duration of interface. Seeing as Henrik doesn't pick a destination, Mischief chooses for him, quote, as he did to so many others.
I will decide. Like I've done to so many others.
The two drive through the streets of Montreal, passing some landmarks like the Turcot Interchange, the Olympic Stadium, and the Mount Royal Cross, finally stopping at the Montreal Museum of Modern Arts. The episode ends with Mischief morphing onto Henrik, changing the color of his suit and even his facial expression to resemble his own. Their story picks up again in episode 5, and don't worry, we'll circle back to episodes 3 and 4 in a moment. Here they walk into the museum, and immediately you'll see something different. This is the first time that Umami uses 3D animation in interface, but very much not the last. It's jarring in the best way possible, and the evolution of Umami's art style and his expanding adoption of mixed media is one of my absolute favorite things about his work. The two reach a room in which they observe a famous painting by René Magritte called The Son of Man, while in the background we can see The Eye, a statue by David Altmeid. These are just the first two of many direct references that Umami will make to well-known pieces of visual art. By his own admission, the inclusion of these references doesn't always have some deeper meaning. He sometimes just thought they would look good or seemed relevant enough to include in a scene.
And so each painting that I include, I mean, that one was metaphorically like one of the strongest ones. Not all of them I have like this great grandiose idea about, but some of them I just like the paintings, you know, and I just want to include it in the artwork.
The direct inspiration for this was actually his favorite director, at least at the time of the interview I watched, Michael Mann. Specifically a scene from Heat, where Robert De Niro's character leans against a window overlooking the ocean, which is a direct visual reference to Alex Colville's painting Pacific. In this case, obviously, the Son of Man is thematically relevant. We can see that Henrik looks exactly like the man depicted, down to his blue suit and bowler hat. This is what Magritte himself said about the painting. At least it hides the face partly. Well, so you have the apparent face, the apple, hiding the visible but hidden, the face of the person. It's something that happens constantly. Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. There is an interest in that which is hidden and which the visible does not show us. The interest can take the form of a quite intense feeling, a sort of conflict, one might say, between the visible that is hidden and the visible that is present. Mischief also helps us out by adding that something is obstructing Henrik's way, just like the apple in the painting. The other interesting thing here is what Mischief says after briefly being morphed onto Henrik's body. He thanks him for the lift, saying that his usual mode of transportation is spaghettification, which, if you didn't know, is the term used for the stretching that happens to any object entering a black hole. Mischief adds something that I want you to remember, that the world seen through Henrik's eyes looks no different to him, but that it's what he desires that brought him there. But apparently desire is something that Mischief is blind to.
What a familiar feeling. The restrictiveness of the human body. To see through your eyes. The world around you still looks no different to me, but it's what you desire that brought you here, and these are the things I'm blind to.
He then notices that somebody is coming, so he hides by morphing into a beautiful sunflower.
beautiful sunflower.
A woman arrives with a child and starts observing the statue, while the kid seems scared and hides his face. In the following entry, we see Henrik riding an elevator, while Mischief slithers up to the last floor, where we notice a recreation of a Salvador Dali painting called Geopoliticus Child Watching the Birth of the New Man, which depicts a veil being lifted from an egg-shaped earth that is cracking to reveal a man coming out of it, while an androgynous figure with a scared child look upon it. Mischief starts going on about how he took the stairs because it's good for the cardio and how exercise can change your DNA, but gets interrupted twice by the museum intercom saying that it closes in 15 minutes. Before they leave, he wants Henrik to look at the painting, saying that it was created in 1943, the same year he got transformed. Now, this is probably the most important moment in this whole first run of episodes.
I was like a little baby chicken, breaking through to explore the unknown. Leaving Earth behind, a shell of its former self. Something is telling me this is what we have in common. The only question is, when you broke free, what did you leave behind?
Dad.
So what Mischief is implying is that both him and Henrik have transformed beyond being mere mortals, that they were reborn into something different. And here Henrik has a flashback which gives us another big clue. When Mischief asks what Henrik left behind after his transformation, we hear his daughter's voice. She reveals that Henrik used to be a photographer, and we see him photographing the test of an atom bomb, which is possibly one of the tumbler snapper tests from 1952, seeing as the photograph corresponds. After this, something strange must have happened, because from his daughter's words, we understand that Henrik doesn't grow old. And here we get one of the most tragic lines in the whole series.
I'm old now, like you should be, but I need to ask. When I join Mom, should we wait for you? Will you ever come?
At this point, Henrik collapses, and for the first time we can see Mischief looking worried and possibly sad. Now, let's leave Henrik and Mischief for a moment and go over those two episodes that I've skipped. Episode 3 introduces our main antagonist, so to speak. It starts with a blimp with a giant baby face at the front, with a logo of Greetings Robotics. We then watch a man give a speech at the United Nations building in New York, saying that this is the beginning of a new era. He explains that since the 1943 event, the world has been plagued by this immaterial cerebral electricity. And since it has manifested, ghost stories and myths have become a reality. A very important thing revealed here is that this is not a new substance, it has been part of the universe all along. What happened in 43 simply made it visible and tangible to us. We see scientists using this cerebral electricity in their experiments. Specifically, it looks like they're employing it to build some kind of a humanoid robot. As we pan to the robot's head, we see that inside there are different faces shifting in the static-like substance, before a mask, reminiscent of a Japanese geisha's makeup, is lowered over it. This is Kami, or Kinetic Autonomous Mechanical Interface, and the man is presenting it as the latest development born from the efforts of scientists, engineers, and, of course, corporate sponsors, in the fight against this darkness that is plaguing the world. Kami teleports on stage as the people cheer, and the episode ends with her closing her fist. There's a bunch of things to unpack here. First of all, it's fundamental to understand the role of cerebral electricity in the series. As this man, the CEO of Greetings Robotics Corporation, aka the eponymous Mr. Greetings, said, the substance has always been here. After its reveal in 1943, it seems to have also brought supernatural phenomena with it. Probably creatures like Mischief and perhaps instabilities in time and space, as we've seen from the instances of teleportation and shapeshifting. But I want to point out how, while Mr. Greetings is describing this substance as a plague on mankind, his own corporation has also harnessed it to create a solution. So that makes for a bit of a contradiction. When Tomchuk was asked what touching this substance would feel like, he said it would feel like nothing. He also compared it to water. It's something that's just there, and it's part of the natural world, but it doesn't really do much on its own.
I think it would it would feel like nothing. It's not really there, is what I'm trying to say. It's like it's there, but it's not like it's not something you should be able to. You can manipulate it, I guess. In the episode, there's some people manipulating it in like glass vials and stuff, right? But it's just it's kind of like water, like benign. It's like a substance that has properties, and but is just kind of exists everywhere.
It's an inert substance, but it can be manipulated. I read it like this: a puddle of water is not very remarkable, but that same substance can be used to create powerful steam engines and hydroelectric power plants. Cerebral electricity is kind of like that too. We've seen it inert in a few scenes, but it also appears whenever Mischief uses his powers, and now it's being employed to create this Kami robot. Which, by the way, I think it's important to point out how one of the main translations for the Japanese word Kami is God, so that's pretty on the nose. My personal suggestion to make more sense of this cerebral electricity is to think of it as a sort of spiritual energy. But I don't mean that in a strictly religious way, but simply in the sense of a mysterious energy that many people believe exists beyond what our senses allow us to perceive, that we might associate with things like the soul, ghosts, magic, and supernatural phenomena of all kind. This will make more sense as we keep exploring the show, trust me. One last thing that I wanted to point out here is the use of this particular video, 1 hour of imaginary celebrities created through a random number generator for an NVIDIA research. It has this uncanny look of shifting, almost recognizable faces. Pretty cool deep cut. Episode 4 is titled The Ghost, and we have this strange creature sitting on a couch with a little girl and watching a television on which we see the same shifting faces we saw in Kami's head. Suddenly we cut to the same sleeping girl in the back of a car that just drove off a bridge and is sinking in the water. That same figure from before is seen just standing on the shore with our boy Mischief as 2 streaks of cerebral electricity fly out of the water and are absorbed by him. We can also notice that the first figure is shaped like a giant hand, and in the next scene it seems to save the child from the water. Back in the apartment, the girl opens her eyes as Kami flies through the sky towards their building. As the girl looks at her through the window, Kami disintegrates the exterior of the building into particles of cerebral electricity, giving us a demonstration of her power. Its chest then opens and starts sucking in the giant hand thing. While the child tries to powerlessly reach her own hand towards it, we get a brief reference to Michelangelo's fresco, The Creation of Adam, and as she's left behind, the episode ends. Things will be revealed in due time, but for now what I'll tell you is that this thing is the eponymous Ghost, sometimes also referred to in the fandom as the Hand, and it's another example of the different beings that have appeared since the world changed. Both its role and the little girls are very important to the story, but I don't want to spoil them just yet. Now, to very briefly put things in order, we have an experiment in 1943 that has changed the world by revealing a substance called cerebral electricity. The substance has also brought about these mythological beings, as Tomchuk finds more correct to call them as opposed to monsters.
Mystical beings. Because in my mind, the mystical beings aren't like monsters. They're kind of metaphors for different things and ideas. And that's how I see it.
A big corporation called Greetings Robotics has been harnessing this same substance for the purposes of apparently cleansing the world of such anomalies. In present time, we also have one of those beings, Mischief, suddenly taken an interest in a man named Henrik, who used to be a photographer during the Tumbler Snapper nuclear bomb tests in 1952. During the tests, something must have happened to make Henrik immortal, and we know that his wife has passed away, and then his own daughter grew old while he was always the same age. As Mischief and Henrik are going around Montreal looking for something, Greetings Robotics has finalized its latest project, the powerful robot Kami capable of utilizing cerebral electricity. The first thing this robot does is absorb the Hand, or the Ghost, who saved a little girl from a sinking car. You can already notice how these first episodes might at first appear somewhat disconnected and abstract, especially if you take them at face value, but from what hints I've given you already, it should also be clear that everything is building up to something big. I do, however, want to comment on a few things that might enhance your appreciation of the project. First of all, you might have noticed how languid and strange the pacing of these episodes is, and how weirdly melancholic they feel. A big part of that is certainly due to how they were created. The idea for the first entry was something that Tomchuk came up with all the way back in 2009, when he was getting into drawing comics. He drew a short comic depicting the first meeting between Mischief and Henrik. up to the point where Mischief says he's a bus, without actually transforming into one in that version. There were really no plans for anything more expansive or any lore at that point. Only in 2017 he decided to make an animation and picked this old comic for it. But one very interesting aspect regarding how the first few episodes were made is that Tomchuk used to make the music first and then animate after, following its rhythm and atmosphere.
For the first part of Interface, pretty much all the songs were made before I made the animation and before I even came up with a script. And so that's kind of weird because I have all these puzzle pieces of episodes that didn't really connect to one another. And it's because I was just listening to the music and kind of visualizing some sort of scene that would happen that would make sense for the music. And I wasn't really concerned about the story making sense.
Now, he doesn't see himself as a melancholy person, but admits that his music often ends up sounding that way, while when he starts drawing and animating stuff, he finds it more natural to create funny things. That's why you end up with this weird mix of a moody atmosphere juxtaposed to this crude MS Paint style that can even look like a meme shitpost at times, and also deep philosophical questions mixed with offbeat jokes and puns. The surprising thing in all of this is how coherent it manages to feel in the final product, which is just a testament to Umami's ability as a creator. This off-kilter style is reminiscent of something like David Lynch's films, though I don't know if that was an actual inspiration for him. What I've personally found mentioned as sources of inspiration by Umami are Michael Mann's films, Ghost in the Shell, The Animatrix, Studio Ghibli films, Batman Beyond, and David Firth's Salad Fingers. So with Breadman, this is already the second animator I've covered that mentions Firth as a direct inspiration. I suspect that his work has low-key been some of the most influential YouTube content since the genesis of the platform. Anyway, when it comes to the characters, we still need to do a little digging. But I do want to already give you my angle on Mischief, because he seems like the most misinterpreted character in the series to me. There's a lot of discussion on whether he's a positive or negative character, whether he's evil or not, or what his hidden agenda is and other such questions. Firstly, the dichotomy of good and evil will basically never be pertinent to Interface. Like all the best stories, it avoids such a simplistic division in favor of a much more nuanced exploration of the character's motivations and objectives. For something that apparently looks so crude, it is surprisingly mature and layered in this sense, and Mischief is the best example of it. From what we've seen so far, he certainly gives off this aura of being a scary and threatening being whose intentions are unclear at best. And that's very much by design, because it perfectly contrasts to his many humorous comments and weird propensity for spewing random factoids. I think that the best way to summarize his personality is actually a one-shot video unrelated to Interface called Open Wide Up. Here Mischief goes to the dentist and everything is played similarly to a horror film. When the dentist drops one of her tools inside his gaping mouth, he tells her to get it out, swallowing her immediately after. Now inside of him, we find another smaller version of Mischief, reversing the roles of dentist and patient. It's his turn now, and...
That looks like trouble. Yep, that's a cavity.
Yeah, as we expect something terrible to happen, he just finds a cavity. The guy seems to relish in making people a bit afraid, but at the end never does anything to harm them. In fact, he's even helpful. And that's kind of his shtick. And it's even in the name. If we think of the word mischief, most of us don't really think of something outright evil, but more so playful and cheeky, like a prank or more generally something that might cause a bit of trouble, but end up being ultimately harmless. It's no coincidence that he also looks like a clown. He's what I would call a wise and chaotic jester archetype. And this will be supported even more by other visual references in the series and by the reveal of his backstory. There will be also different parallels between Mischief and the Devil, and people have even pointed out his continuous adoption of a snake-like form. And while this is certainly a clue into the fact that he's not a good-spirited character with a clear moral compass, it should also not be taken to mean that he is outright evil, which some seem to think. Mischief is beyond good and evil. In his rebirth, he has ascended. As he himself says, he left the world behind. My interpretation of his character is that whatever universal knowledge he has gained from his disintegration is not fit for a human mind. In some way, his psyche must have been broken, and his way of viewing the world seems to swing constantly between deep terror and childlike lightheartedness. We'll talk more about him, but for now, yeah, discard the evil mischief angle if you had it, and that general cliche good versus evil mindset. Concentrate more on the characters' motivations and their specific worldviews. Now, let's get back to the episodes and finish up the first part of the series. In Entry 7, The Mechanical Saccharitis, we hear Mr. Greetings' voice once again. He explains the origins of the universe and of life on Earth, to then go over the evolution of living beings from simple to more complex. We see the Greetings Robotics blimp pass overhead and then switch to the view inside of a computer, showing us the blimp's schematics with Kami in the middle. As Mr. Greetings looks at it, we see that some processes are running on the robot, like degaussing, which is the elimination of an unwanted magnetic field, probably a remnant of Kami using her powers against the ghost. More machinery connects to Kami after her mask is removed, and here we notice that the front of the blimp has a skull-like structure containing an enormous brain. It seems that what Kami has absorbed gets uploaded into this brain, and we also get this beautifully made MRI-style scan of it, and we see that the title Mechanical Saccharitis is the name of the blimp itself. When we see the ghost's hand being scanned, we also get a coded message that has been solved back in the day, according to the wiki by Josiah Snar on the Umami Discord, so hats off. It reads, "Ultimate complexity is the final destination. Incoming transmission incomplete. Gene sequencing unknown nucleotides. GR discovery, copying data and orientation." Which reinforces the idea that Kami has absorbed the ghost and its specific structure is now being repurposed by the Saccharitis. Finally, the ghost's face is also being scanned as Mr. Greetings observes the process. And the episode ends on a shot of a whale breaking through the water surface and the Saccharitis flying towards a lighthouse. An interesting thing to note here is that Saccharitis is a reference to Saccharitis coronarius, an aquatic organism that lived on the planet 540 million years ago. It was, until fairly recently, believed to be the earliest known ancestor of human beings, but it's now categorized in a completely different group. The theory given on the wiki surrounding its inclusion in interface is that the blimp, or Greetings Robotics as a whole, is also meant to be seen as a gaping maw consuming things, reflecting the Saccharitis' mouth. Seeing what happened to the ghost and its transference from Kami to the blimp's brain, this seems plausible. The idea that it was also an ancestor of humanity was also very probably meant to be taken into consideration here, seeing as, from what I gather, the reclassification of the Saccharitis happened in 2022, a year after Interface had already ended. Looking at the context of this episode with its strong focus on evolution, this might perhaps mean that the Mechanical Saccharitis is still in its early form and that it has yet to evolve. The first message that appeared on the screen before reads, "Ultimate complexity is the final destination," which might be a clue in this sense. Maybe it's meant to represent the early ancestor of a whole new species of beings. This might seem like a stretch for now, but when we get into the whole transhumanist aspect here, it will make more sense. In episode 8, we're back to Henrik and Mischief. At first, we're shown Montreal's cityscape, with shots focusing on the angel figure atop the Sir Georges-Étienne Cartier monument in Mount Royal Park and the Olympic Stadium once more, both having pieces made of or covered in cerebral electricity. We then pan to Henrik laying in a hospital bed after his collapse in episode 6. He's looking at a television, in which, once again, we see those shifting faces. For a brief moment, a pink bird flies by Henrik's window, and you can easily figure out who this is. On the TV, the text "Secure beneath the watchful eyes" appears, and this is a reference to an incredibly dystopic 2002 poster that was used by London Public Transport to advertise their employment of CCTV surveillance. It's genuinely absurd that this went through, and it looks like something straight out of 1984. Of course, we also learned that this message is from Greetings Robotics, so now we know that they're also surveilling the population, which is unsurprising. The creepy laugh at the end really doesn't help your case, guys. Then a surreal ad plays.
Hey kids, do you like monsters? Yeah! What about scary monsters? Oh yeah! Introducing Hazmat's Monster Collection. Beasts, ghosts, scary demons, and more. But be careful, their claws are sharp, their teeth are sharper, and they don't take no for an answer. Hazmat's Monster Collection, for the kid with no fear.
And you might have noticed that when it said ghosts, the face of the ghost appeared for a moment. A pretty cool touch, which might signify some sort of cerebral electricity interference. At this point, Mischief appears in his bird shape, saying that he's trying to be a bird, but that he hasn't quite figured it out yet. Aside from being a funny line, this also tells us that Mischief doesn't have an inherent knowledge of how the things he transforms into work, but has to learn it. And is that a little smirk on Henrik's face? Is he actually glad to see Mischief? That's so cute. Anyway, our pink friend starts reading Henrik's patient chart, and it's here that we canonically learn his name, Henryk Niebieski, which suggests Polish origins, since Niebieski means blue in Polish. It's also here that we find out he was born in 1910, making him over 100 years old. After cracking some jokes, Mischief tells Henrik that it's time to skedaddle before they turn him into a lab rat, so he transforms into a parachute and the two paraglide out of the hospital. In episode 9, we're introduced to a new character, a giant chef octopus. Henrik walks into a restaurant with Mischief morphed over him like in the museum episode, and Mischief immediately starts busting the chef's balls about him chopping up other sea creatures, calling it cannibalistic. The chef recognizes Mischief's voice and calls him a parasite because he is, quote, using a host for his own survival, referring to Henrik. An interesting moment here is the chef saying that pink is not a good choice of camouflage and that unlike Mischief, he can change his color. Mischief will later tell Henrik that he actually can change color, but he simply chooses to be pink, which is supported by the time he transformed into a sunflower in the museum. Just another moment that gives us an insight into his character. As another man walks into the restaurant, the chef reveals that he's been having visions of a machine that processes the world in ones and zeros. And we also see what I'm guessing is that same vision. At first, a flashing image of the Saccharitis appears, and he has 2 circles over his eyes, which immediately made me think of the ancient practice of putting coins on the eyes of the deceased. So this could be some sort of foreshadowing. We can also notice that the Saccharitis has 2 giant hands, which might come from absorbing the ghost. Kami levitates in front of it, and the scene is in black and white. It looks like Kami is emanating or absorbing energy, and there's these spheres in front of her which look like the color is melting off of them or something. Kami then puts out her hand, and a heart covered in flashing colors inside of a cage-like sphere hovers onto it. The chef comments that camouflage has no effect on those who see the world in black and white.
I fear camouflage has no effect on those who see the world in black and white.
Which is a line that goes super hard. Now, looking at the choices in colors here, it's safe to assume that he's referring directly to Kami. It looks like in the process of cleansing the world of anomalies, it might also be cleansing it of any metaphorical color, which could perhaps be imagination, emotion, variety, or something else we will discuss later when we talk more in depth about Greetings Robotics. What we see is that this color is being transferred and hoarded into the Saccharitis. We will soon learn what the floating heart is about. Just pay attention to the recurrence of organs and body parts in interface, which is not random. Mischief, being willfully obtuse, asks,
Hold up. Is this about that weirdo staring at us from the middle of the room?
So he turns into a fly and lands on the man's nose, telling him,
Hey buddy, you're a bit early. The restaurant doesn't open until 5.
In episode 10, An Illusion of Time, we see Henrik's past, as the description tells us. It starts with a house somewhere in the countryside. The sky is completely red. Inside there's a young girl playing the piano, and on the wall a picture hangs. It's a bit hard to make out, but this looks like Henrik with his wife and child. As the girl plays, Henrik walks up to the window. We cut to a wedding taking place in front of a tree, possibly Henrik's own wedding. Then it seems like the tree has grown a bit, and there's a swing set in front of it with a girl swinging back and forth. The tree is even bigger now, and Henrik is taking a photo of a group of people. There's a woman with a baby in the front, but we can't make out the faces of the other 3 people behind her, though we can assume they're different ages, seeing as one of them is even using a cane. This is probably Henrik's family, but more recently. Perhaps the little girl in the swing set was Henrik's daughter and has now had a child of her own? I love how the passage of time is not only represented by the tree, but also subtly by the changing landscape. At first there's just grassy hills around, then it seems like the land is being used for farming, as we can notice a silo in the background and the different coloring makes it seem like it's all been turned into fields. Finally we see some houses and even a radio tower. This is such amazing attention to details, which might seem obvious now that I said it, but it can easily be missed in a first watch. At least I missed it, maybe I'm just dumb. The episode ends with Henrik longingly looking out of the window again, but something is different. The girl playing the piano is gone, and the new photo has appeared along with the vase. The photo is the one that Henrik took of his family in the previous scene. This means again that the two parallel scenes are from two different moments in time. I want you to pay attention to the colors and interface because they're not random. In fact, Tomchuk, who I think rightfully said that constraints breed creativity, believes that when you give some limits to how you make art, it turns your work into a sort of puzzle that might be more interesting and focused for the artist, and has decided to only use 20 colors in interface. That means he had to ponder his choices carefully. And the other times we saw the use of this stark red sky against black and gray scenes was during Henrik's flashback of his daughter in the museum, and the scene of the car sinking and the girl being saved by the ghost. It was already clear that these scenes were all in the past, but this might imply that they're tied to Henrik's past specifically. Maybe the people in the crash and the little girl are related to him. And Mischief's presence at that scene also implies that he's been in the picture for longer than we thought. Episode 11, Revelation, starts with the recreation of a famous Andrew Wyeth painting titled Christina's World, which depicts a woman lying in a field with a farmhouse in the distance. Many have described the painting giving them a vague feeling of dread. The mix of the woman being so pale and skinny and turned away from the viewer, the colorless barren fields and the concrete gray sky, and the farmhouse being so far off, all mix into this strange emptiness that's hard to articulate. The real story behind it is an interesting one. The painting depicts Wyeth's neighbor, Anna Christina Olsen, who had a degenerative muscle disorder which left her unable to walk. She refused to use a wheelchair, so she would crawl around the property on her hands. So that feeling of wrongness isn't, well, wrong. When you look at the painting, it becomes obvious that she's not just chilling in that field. I'll also point out that in the interface version, the house kinda looks like Henrik's house from his memories, but that might be a stretch. Anyway, we're once again in the restaurant. Henrik and Mischief are sitting in a booth with food on their table. Mischief comments that noodles are his favorite, go figure, and slurps up a single noodle in a scene that's way too long and uncomfortable. He then asks Henrik if he's not hungry and says that he probably has no appetite because of all the cigarettes he smokes. Then adds that he doesn't really need to eat, but that food is just too tasty. He remarks that the chef might be grumpy but has a big heart, which is another subtle piece of foreshadowing that will soon make more sense. Here is also where we get Mischief explaining that he chooses to be this color, while he points out that Henrik never had a choice. We see Henrik taking a photo out of his pocket with a particular focus on his wedding ring, as Mischief figures out that he longs for his late family. We see that it's the same picture he took in the previous flashback. Mischief comments that 3 of them died of old age, and I'm guessing that's his wife, daughter, who we saw was growing older in the museum flashback, and the third, I'm not actually sure. It's possibly this old man, perhaps his son-in-law or something. Then says that 2 were killed in a tragic car accident. And we finally understand the connection here. It seems like the woman in the front holding the baby, who looks older, could actually be his daughter, and the 2 younger people in the back are his granddaughter and her husband, which would make the sleeping child his great-granddaughter. Yeah, I know this family tree is a bit complicated, but I guess that's what happens when you're immortal and see different generations come and go. Mischief says this.
I have something that you might want to know. You can choose to accept it, or not. One thing is for certain though. The truth will set you free.
He holds an apple in front of Henrik, harkening back once again to the Magritte painting, and says that the truth will set him free. The reference here is also obviously to the forbidden fruit and the tree of knowledge from the Genesis. So this, once again, adds to the parallels I've mentioned before between Mischief and the devil. We hear Henrik bite into it, accepting the knowledge. At this point we see a disconnected scene which I think either takes place right before episode 1 or is just completely metaphorical. Henrik is standing on the edge of a skyscraper, probably considering jumping off and putting an end to his eternal existence. The starting shot once again seems like a reference to the Magritte painting, given the composition. At the same time, we see Mischief speeding through the city. He starts wondering what it is that consumes Henrik, and what it is that Mischief himself consumes, saying that maybe they're the same thing. Then he asks,
What did I consume?
as his head splits open to reveal the same type of shifting faces we saw under Kami's mask, and on the television too. As Henrik steps back from the ledge, Mischief adds,
Who did I consume?
We're taken back to the scene of the car crash, and I can't tell you enough how in this moment, like many others in the series, the music just ties everything together in such a perfect way.
These are the answers that I searched for. The answers that I need.
As the car sinks, we see the cerebral electricity leave Henrik's granddaughter and her husband's bodies and being absorbed by Mischief, and this clears up what we had already seen in the previous flashback. He finally confirms outright that Henrik's great-granddaughter is still alive, so the two of them quickly run out of the shop and leave, but not before Mischief can be a dork again.
Punch buggy. I'm just messing with you.
The shot then lingers on a man at a payphone, looking at the scene. Then it closes on the Wyeth painting once again, as Mischief tells Henrik that it's time to go home. So maybe I wasn't so wrong about the house depicted being his, although it might also just be meant as a parallel for Christina crawling towards her own home. So before we get into the last episode of this first half, let's just unpack this for a moment. The little girl being saved and protected by the ghost is confirmed to be Henrik's great-granddaughter, the only survivor of a car crash that killed his granddaughter and her husband. We don't yet know what happened to her after Kami absorbed the ghost. Cerebral electricity is somehow tied to people's souls, for lack of a better term. It could be their consciousness, their minds, or whatever else. I don't think it's really fundamental to give it some specific name. And we see that Mischief absorbed the souls of Henrik's dead family members. This, in turn, gives a clearer meaning to what the shifting faces represent, too. As I've said, I think it's easier to look at cerebral electricity as a sort of spiritual energy that comprises human souls. It seems like the souls or consciousnesses of the dead are present in the cerebral electricity, although we don't yet know to what degree. Specifically, it's like these souls can get trapped in special vessels like Mischief or Kami, maybe even empowering them. Anyway, our characters finally have a defined objective: finding Henrik's great-granddaughter. Episode 12 caps off the first half of Interface, and it does so on a pretty hype note. First of all, we get more Greetings ramblings. And if you pay attention to his words, you can immediately infer the parallels to modern corporate CEOs.
The intentions are pure. My vision is clear. Our goal is communal. We have the most advanced technology, the most precise simulations, machines that have the ability to adapt, internalize, learn, and evolve. Everything has been calculated.
Although back then it would have been about algorithms probably and running websites, while today it's perhaps even more relevant with the evolution of AI. At one moment we also see a global search for the same hovering heart that we saw in Chef's vision. As Greetings tries to convince himself that everything's ready and all has been calculated, that his objectives are for the good of everybody, he can't help a gut feeling that something is wrong. Then the following lines are some of the most important in the whole series to understand a few of Umami's main themes and concerns.
As we sanitize this earth, the threats we face aren't scattered to the winds. They are consumed, repurposed, utilized. Nothing will ever be deleted. We will always have the upper hand.
As the mechanical Saccharitis reaches Montreal and Kami studies her own mask, Greetings adds the classic Nietzsche quote, "If you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes into you." Although we should probably add the first part of that quote, "He who fights with monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster himself." Now the music ramps up and we can see that Greetings Robotics has found Chef's restaurant, their target. I'm guessing that the man who walked into the restaurant in episode 9 is the same as the guy at the payphone, and I'm assuming that he's a greetings informant and has led them here. Kami flies down to the restaurant and we get the first action scene of the project. But before that, I just want to say, justice for Umami. The HBO show Raised by Wolves plagiarized the interface. Okay, I'm kidding, but it was funny to me nonetheless how both of them have an all-powerful feminine android who float around T-posing and disintegrating shit in their paths. Obviously, the Jesus floating has been a thing for a long time, and the other elements also probably have different inspirations. I also don't want to be sued. Anyway, Kami obliterates the front of the restaurant like she had already done previously with the building, and Chef's inside getting ready to fight, holding cleavers in all of his 8 arms. We then get an analysis that reveals to us that Chef is, in fact, the heart that they were looking for. Kami seems to imitate him by growing 6 more arms, and this harkens back to classic depictions of some Hindu and Buddhist gods. As the chef throws his knives at her in this great 3D scene, she spawns in a ghost hand to block them. So we have a confirmation that Kami can use the powers of those she consumes. So Chef just rams her and sends her flying kaiju style. As she flies, we can also see billboards with more shifting faces. Her flight is interrupted as she slams into the Mount Royal Cross, which was already teased a few times and is finally used in the action, releasing cerebral electricity all around. And it's yet another instance of Kami associated with religious imagery. I'll remind you that her name means God, so yeah. Chef flies up, but the ghost hands appear around him and the Sakuritis behind his back. The hands form a Naruto ninja sign and the chef gets completely obliterated. And the first part of interface closes on the Sakuritis' giant baby face. So we have a lot to discuss. First of all, I called it a Naruto ninja sign because I generally think that it's the tiger sign. It might look like the Rin sign in Real Kuji-in, which apparently represents water and power, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, I think it was included mainly because it looked cool and is in line with all the other Japanese elements here. Besides that, at this point we have enough meat on these bones here to delve a bit deeper. Let's start with Henrik and Mischief. The most obvious thematic element to both of them so far is observation, specifically the observation of history, but developed in 2 different ways. Henrik is, for all intents and purposes, still a human being, but his immortality forces him to look at history and life from the sideline. This is a man that thinks he's lost everyone he has ever loved and probably gave up on creating new human connections just to not go through that pain again. But he has also quite literally watched first-hand history being made during the atomic bomb tests and throughout the rest of the century. It is clearly no coincidence that he was a photographer, because what is photography if not the attempt to freeze time, to crystallize a single moment, making it exist virtually forever? He is forced by his change to keep living indefinitely through time, losing everything that ties him to this world and desperately trying to hold on to the present, which inevitably becomes a past that entraps him. Henrik cannot let go, and his grief consumes him and obstructs his view, stopping him from going forward.
Henrik kind of represents more than himself, which is he represents people who are unchanging in their ways of thinking, and like people from the past generation who are dead set, stuck in their ways. Things are never going to change.
With this, I also believe that him not speaking is something that could have started after all the losses he's experienced, when he understood that nothing he said or did would last or even change anything, either as an automatic reaction to prolonged trauma or as an intentional vow of silence of sorts. More objectively, Tomchuk stated that he wanted Henrik to be a sort of everyman, a character that could be a vessel for the immersion of anyone watching the series. That's why he decided to make him a silent protagonist.
When I started writing Interface, there was one thing I did plan out that wasn't just based on the music, which was I was going to make Henrik kind of a character that people can feel like they are, if that makes any sense. Like, he doesn't speak, so it's kind of like you kind of feel like you can be Henrik almost,
He also remarks that if you want to make art that resonates with people, there need to be some aspects in it that reflect the current reality of the world. In particular, at the time, he was looking at the various political and societal problems in Canada, chiefly low wages and young people feeling dejected. And Henrik's passive personality reflects that dejection, and his story reflects the possible fear of the future.
If you want to create artwork that's really resonating with people, you should have like aspects of it that reflect our current society and to some degree. And so I try to, I don't do it necessarily consciously. It's just, these are things I think about all the time, and it kind of comes out of the work. It's like, in Canada, we got some problems with the wages haven't really increased with inflation, right? There's a lot of people having struggling to find work even. And then there's this housing crisis we got in Canada. And so I feel like a lot of young people are feeling dejected and a little bit like they don't really know what their purpose is, and that sort of thing. And that's kind of, the character and interface, Henrik, he's kind of the same way, he's like, what is my purpose now? I just keep living forever, and for what? Because, all these things are happening around me and the world's moving on without me, right? And I'm staying the same. And
on the other hand, Mischief is a sort of universal observer on a higher level that in turn observes Henrik himself. We can't really know to what point his mind really expanded, how much he knows about the world and how many secrets he has glimpsed into, but I think that it's not really important. Whether by choice or not, we see him be surprised by certain things. We see him adapting to the world instead of immediately knowing things, like when he was figuring out how to be a bird, but he also seems to know things that he shouldn't. In his museum monologue, he says he broke free, went on to explore the unknown and left the world behind. So the question would be, what does he want with Henrik then? Well, we'll find out in the second part that Mischief does indeed have some personal, let's say materialistic interests in following Henrik. But one that is not clear but I think is somewhat implied, or at least I choose to see it that way, so take it more as a personal interpretation of mine, is that Mischief is vicariously living the human experience again through Henrik. This is clearly symbolized in the instances of Mischief morphing onto Henrik's body, but there's more than that. The way I see it, he lost most of his humanity when he broke free, but not all of it. There's obviously still something of his old self in there. While Henrik is still human, but it seems like his humanity has been slowly calcifying in time. This, along with many other elements, obviously creates similarities between the two. Mischief outright states in the museum that this is what they have in common. But there are also those lines in the previous episode which I think are even more important. When he says that the world looks no different to him seen through Henrik's eyes, but also adds that desire is what brought him there, and that's something he is blind to. As I see it, there could be two angles to this. Mischief is fascinated by people in the same way that an adult would be fascinated by a child. They're apparently more simple and easier to understand, but at the same time, their little minds work in certain ways and make certain creative connections that the adult has lost the ability to make with age. We do know that Henrik is not the first person Mischief has followed, and that there have been many others. But also, whatever small piece of humanity Mischief has left in him might be fighting for its existence in a way that he himself can't fully understand, and is perhaps making him subconsciously long for the human experience. The restrictiveness of the human body, desires, food, these are not things he needs, but he likes them. I also think that there's definitely an argument to be made for Mischief growing more human throughout the whole series, but you'll have to decide for yourself. If nothing else, Tomchuk does say that he becomes more down to earth.
When I was kind of making his character, I didn't really do anything intentionally. I kind of thought, well, maybe his voice should be like this, right? And then what his personality is like, The first episode is, I guess he doesn't reveal too much of his personality, but I guess as time goes on, he becomes more down to earth, despite him being like a multi-dimensional character, or whatever it is that he is.
It's their similarity that allows their relationship to form in this way, but precisely because it's not a perfect parallel. Both have something missing that the other might find. I know it's cliche, but it's kind of a yin and yang type of situation, two mirrored opposites on a common ground. Beyond that, their dynamic is also almost surely inspired by Dante's comedy. Whether this was meant from the start or something that simply manifested in time, I don't know, but the similarities are there. First of all, Henrik is an everyman type of character, just like the protagonist Dante in the comedy, which is quite literally indicated right at the start. It's widely interpreted that when Dante writes "our" in the very first line, "when I had journeyed half of our life's way," it's immediately meant to give the story a universal breadth. It's a story that encompasses all of us. Dante is also lost at the start of his journey, both literally and metaphorically, and there is a big hill that obstructs his view of the sun and 3 wild beasts blocking his way. Henrik is too lost and confused and has something obstructing his way. In the poem, the soul of the great poet Virgil shows up and acts as a guide for Dante. To continue his journey and to find himself, he will have to traverse hell with Virgil's help. A bunch of people in the comments have noticed that Mischief also acts like a guide to Henrik, leading him towards knowledge and out of his lost state. More specifically, like a psychopomp. a spirit or god who leads a soul towards the afterlife without passing judgment. Now, we don't yet know if Henrik is heading towards the afterlife, but we surely have had a few clues as to the existence of one, with all the imagery tied to souls. So this is one side of the story we could say that is about the past, about stagnation and the inability to move on. But then we also have the Greetings Robotics side of the story. Now, this one, on the surface, is very clearly about evolution, progress, about fixing things, saving the world, and reaching humanity's next step, but obviously shows a darker underbelly. Mr. Greeting says that everything has been calculated, that the goal is, quote, communal, but something tugs at him. Just like our protagonist, something obstructs his ability to see. Greetings is an example of a great innovator that, while moving humanity forward one step, also takes 2 steps back. It's perfectly expressed in his goals. He wants to fix the world, return it to its original state, but he also is literally using the means he has in this current new state, i.e. cerebral electricity, to achieve that, which basically makes this an Ouroboros kind of situation, you know, the snake biting its own tail. There's a constant theme in interface, from the Philadelphia experiment to Greetings' creation of Kami, of innovations that create paradigm shifts in the world. Tomchuk himself cites its parallels to things like the Industrial Revolution, the creation of the atomic bomb, the creation of modern technology, and other such things. Great leaps in our evolution that always bring with them an indefinite amount of risks, problems, and even victims. For how much Greetings can calculate the outcomes, he is but a man, and he will always be short-sighted. Which also finally brings us to the big theme of transhumanism, and what do you even call it? Totalitarian internet corporatization? I can't even pronounce that. Let me explain as briefly as possible, or we'll never get out of this one. One of Umami's concerns in 2017, when he created the Greetings Robotics storyline, is something he observed happening on the internet. All major websites had basically transformed into profit-driven corporate ecosystems, in which the big investors, the CEOs, and the algorithms were basically dictating the law. This was also at the height of the so-called cancel culture, which I know sounds cringe now with some of its implications, but in that there was a very worrying phenomenon. The virtual powers that be were trying to sanitize the internet as much as possible, and this meant that somebody could have their whole personal page removed at a moment's notice when stepping out of line. All of their content, pictures, videos, statements could suddenly disappear into the ether, which is something that still happens to this day.
There's things that are illegal on the internet that need to be cleaned up for sure. I'm not saying that the internet should just be some place where everyone can do whatever the hell they want. But it's almost getting to a point where you can't have an opinion on something, and the opinions aren't necessarily, who's to say how dangerous they are, is what I'm saying. And so we're seeing that real time right now, and especially the past couple of years. And it just happened to happen while I was making the web series. That's kind of how I see the Greetings Robotics character, while he's cleaning up the earth of all these ideas and these loose ends that don't fit the grand narrative, and he's containing them for himself. There's like elements of that too.
Similarly, with the Greetings Robotics, we see things being deleted or removed in a big cleansing of loose ends. And this is done, allegedly, for the greater good. But who decides what should be removed? It's obviously not a democratic process, it's the big corporation itself. And so Greetings says that the cerebral electricity brought ghosts to the world. It brought darkness, it's a plague. But what we've seen so far is a ghost that saves a little girl, a giant octopus who is simply a chef at a restaurant, and a mischievous pink stretchy clown who, sure, absorbs dead people's souls, but is not actively hurting or killing anybody. This is probably also part of why Tomchuk calls them mythological beings instead of monsters. There's no obvious negative connotation to them, they don't seem harmful. And so this whole process comes off as just the inability of yet another character to accept change. But this one believes he has the means to re-establish the status quo of how things were before. It's no coincidence that Kami sees the world in ones and zeros, in black and white. It just follows the directive and removes anything akin to an anomaly, quite literally draining the world of its color in the process. It's the same with art and with social media, and that hasn't changed too much. Perhaps you're not removed for being different or controversial, but the algorithms can often bury you while serving all the users corporate samey slop. And that was 2017. If you consider that we got all of this AI chaos going on now, it becomes even more relevant. The slop has always been there. It's just being produced in much larger quantities now, and most of it is not even being made by real people. The AI discourse also takes us to the whole transhumanism side of things. So a lot of people have already talked about this ideology, much better and in-depth than I can. But in simple terms, transhumanism's main objective is using technology like AI, bioengineering, and whatever else to augment humanity in a way that takes it to the next step of evolution. If you listen to any big tech corpo CEO speak nowadays, you'll notice that basically like all of them are totally bought into this shit, and it's pretty terrifying. The obvious problem here, besides the shaky bioastronomical technological mumbo-jumbo they spew, that often was very obviously lifted from some sci-fi novel with surprisingly little awareness, is the fact that this is not for everybody. It so obviously leads to the creation of an augmented superior elite category of people, which would be the billionaires themselves, while leaving all of us poor suckers in the dirt. A story as old as time. Anyway, we see this clearly reflected in Greeting's adoption of Kami and the mechanical Saccharitis, and all the talk about evolution. What I find interesting is how he himself seems unsure of all of this. He even says that all of the organisms over time have strived to become more complex, and then asks, but why?
Over time, the atoms and molecules that make up each and every one of us rearrange themselves. Over time, they have strived to become more complex. But why?
The problem here is that his own creation might be too great to be stopped at this point. Finally, I want to commend Umami on how he managed to wrap this first part up. As I've said before, the production of the series began in a bit of a disjointed way. The starting animation came from something he had lying around for years, and the episodes followed the music which was made before the animations. But when we listen to what more he has to say, we realize that it's even messier. The introduction of Greetings Robotics in episode 3 was something he came up with because he felt the need to add stakes by introducing some form of antagonists working behind the scenes. So the parallel storyline that basically serves as one of the fundamental keys to understand and interpret interface was even more of an afterthought. In different occasions, Tomchuk states that it's only around episodes 9 and later, and especially episode 12, that he started to tie things together and thinking about how he wanted all of it to end. And this should be in no way interpreted in a negative way or like him throwing random ideas together just for the heck of it. One of Tomchuk's objectives was that of making every episode somewhat self-contained as a piece of animation. Something that could be enjoyed on its own without needing to wait for the next installment, I'm guessing.
There's some episodes I made where I feel like they're not as strong as they could be, but I want like almost every episode to be like a self-contained kind of interesting moment, you know?
And I feel like this is also where that Salad Fingers, or more broadly the early YouTube/Newgrounds animation influences seep through the most. Those projects often worked in the same way. They would show us some absurd or comical situation that could already become viral on its own, then they would repeat similar concepts again, slowly creating an interconnected through line, and you could never be sure of where the actual story emerged. At some point, you just realize it's there. Interface follows similar principles, in that every entry has its own little emotional arc. Many creatives often get asked where they get their ideas and inspirations, and it always feels like such a lame question, because sure, you might say that you like some specific films and pieces of art, and they must have had some influence on your work, but a lot of the ideas just, come to you. I'm sure that many people in the artistic field will relate to this, and looking specifically at interface, I think it's plain to see, sometimes ideas just pop up randomly, while you're doing something completely unrelated. Other times it feels like they're kind of free-floating in a sort of idea ether in your brain, and you just sort of catch them because they feel right, fun, or interesting. Often you don't plan on things to develop in a specific way. You just have a starting point you really like, and you want to see it evolve in an organic manner, knowing that at some point you'll be able to form the needed connections to implement the idea in a tighter way in your work. Think of it like this: you're coming up with a character, and while thinking of his design, you really want to add an eye patch because it's groovy. At first, maybe you don't really think of why they have an eye patch, but while developing the story and adding new characters, you suddenly think that it would be cool if one of the other characters was involved in them losing their eye, and you can subtly develop that backstory, and boom, you got lore. In interface, look at the chef. Tomchuk thought it would be cool to make an octopus character, and somewhere along the line probably realized that it could have a bigger symbolic role and decided that it looked somewhat like a heart, so it could play again into that collection of body parts theme, just like the ghost.
I don't know, like when I came up with the octopus chef, for instance, I wasn't really like thinking that much. I was just kind of doing things instinctively. And I don't even know what like made me want to animate an octopus. Because I remember when I was doing it, I was like, what the hell? Why did I choose an octopus? Like there's 8 limbs I have to animate at once, right? I wasn't really like thinking too hard about it. I was just sort of I wanted to do it, and so I just drew it,
And I think that this is part of what makes interface exciting and often surprising. But obviously, it all has to build up to something to be also satisfying. Tomchuk probably took some time to realize how much this little art project was evolving, and so again used what many people don't: restraint. Which I know seems crazy to say for such a surreal series, but bear with me here. All of the greatest artists in history understood that certain restraints and limitations are tools for creativity, not clutches. Giving yourself restrictions often leads to some sort of obstacle or friction while creating a work of art, which in turn will require even more creativity on your part to find a solution. This, on the one side, is fun because it turns the problem into a puzzle you have to solve and requires out-of-the-box thinking. On the other, it often helps to give a sense of coherence to your art, a recognizable and more streamlined style even. Think about poetry. The vast majority of it before the 20th century used specific recognizable and repeatable forms. To use the madman Dante Alighieri again, he decided to write what became one of history's most important poems in a form that repeats for 14,233 lines. It's all 3-line stanzas with interlocking rhymes repeating the same structure over and over, that is ABA, BCB, CDC, etc., forming 33 canti, which are basically chapters, for 3 cantiche, which are basically bigger chapters, plus 1 introductory canto, so it all adds up to 100 chapters, and every single line has the same length, which is the Italian endecasillabo, consisting of 11 syllables. Do you think he just hit a fat one and randomly came up with this? No, it's all pre-planned limitations that made it so even to this day you have to take at least 3 different university courses about this damn book to hear professors gush about its perfectly realized architecture. But you don't have to go so far back. Look at movies today. Think of how many movies set out to be, or at least to appear to be made in one take. Birdman, Russian Ark, 1917, Mads, Climax. Obviously it's harder to make a film like this, but damn does it make for a memorable viewing experience. Or think of other stylistic choices like shooting The Lighthouse on 35mm film and in black and white, or shooting Inland Empire on a kinda shitty digital camera, or even stuff like frame rate modulation in animated movies like Into the Spider-Verse. It's genuinely impossible to think of how many self-imposed or medium-imposed limitations exist in art, and most of us often don't think about it. But these are not a bad thing, because completely unrestrained creativity can become either too chaotic or scatterbrained, or might give you choice paralysis. Beyond opting to use only 20 colors, Umami also used the same frame rate of 15 frames per second for everything and the same low resolution. And these limitations, instead of being a crutch, have helped to make interface immediately recognizable and unique. Not to mention more easy to produce on a hardware level. But most importantly for me, which is something I've already commended in other videos, he decided that it had to wrap up and end at some point. This is probably the hardest part of having an ongoing episodic project that is doing very well and is loved by so many people. You'll probably want to keep going and going and going, to the point you end up stretching everything too thin. Think of how many TV shows should have ended after just 1 or a couple of seasons, and instead have kept going, getting constantly worse and losing all of their viewers. I'm looking at you, X-Files, my painful love. Deciding that you'd rather end things earlier but on a high note must be very hard to do, and at times it genuinely seems like a lost art. So, out of all great things about interface, this alone is already worthy of all my respect. Okay, let's not lose any more time and jump right into the second part. The second part is, in the briefest terms possible, about Mischief and Henrik trying to find his great-granddaughter while Greetings Robotics is trying to find them, because they're the next anomaly to absorb. Sounds simple, right? Episode 13 shows Henrik and Mischief in his car form, traveling in the countryside. The first thing I want to point out here is Mischief commenting that Henrik's cigarettes seem to spontaneously appear in his jacket. This might seem like a silly detail, but some people have combined it with other clues to propose a theory about Henrik's immortality. The idea here is that whatever happened to him didn't simply give him eternal life, but more specifically trapped him in a time loop of that moment. This would explain why whenever he smokes his cigarette, a new one appears in his pocket, but it would also be thematically perfect. What with him being a photographer and trying to freeze time. Of course, this is just speculation, but I really like it. I mean, Mischief even comments that he doesn't have an ashtray and that Henrik's not one to litter, creating another little loop. But at this point, I don't want to judge every piece of dialogue as a metaphor, or I'll start grasping at straws soon. Mischief then says this.
Kind of convenient, isn't it? This whole time, I was trying to figure out your secret. And it was me that had it all along. You must feel suspicious of me.
then announces that he's running out of fuel, which is pretty hysterical in itself, and says that he needs to switch to something more sustainable, becoming a unicycle. The two crash because of a branch on the ground, and Mischief says apologetically,
Sorry, Henrik. Sometimes I can't help myself.
turning himself in a normal bicycle. So, did Mischief really not know? I mean, we literally saw him witnessing the crash. There must be something else going on here. Also, does he really need fuel? And is that like actual gasoline or cerebral electricity? Is he just pretending to be out of fuel to mess with Henrik? Or so that Henrik will also have to work in tandem with him? I guess that this would make sense with all the talk of him being a parasite. Everybody also pointed out that this is the first time we see Henrik showing this much emotion. Initially, he seems shocked as Mischief morphs into a unicycle. Then, after his impressive front flip, we hear him make a sound for the first time, even though it's just gasping. Here he also smiles, almost like this little incident suddenly made him feel alive for a moment. In episode 14, we finally get part of Mischief's backstory, although it's not that simple. It's pretty hard to tell what's real or not in this one, and I think that it's done on purpose. It comes off like a memory that has warped through time, perhaps to the point of even breaking the fourth wall. You'll see what I mean. Surprisingly enough, the clown-looking guy used to actually be a clown. We find out that before his service in the Navy and his transformation, Mischief used to work at a carnival, Dreamland, as the, quote, incorporeal clown named Percy. Most of the episode here is just a monologue by the ringmaster warming up the crowd for the arrival of Percy. As you can imagine though, both his words and the images we see tell us a lot more. Let's start with the ringmaster. His whole speech starts from the question,
"Have you ever seen the face of death?"
He goes on to say that everybody, whether they know it or not, has seen it at some point. He's seen it in a dream the night before, where he tamed a 100-foot dragon by giving it a name. In fact, he says that he brought it here tonight. And it is Percy. Now, Mischief being called the face of death is in line with a lot of what we've seen already. The ringmaster even says that death has a face that can take many forms. So he is literally describing a giant shape-shifting dragon clown. That's our boy. More than that, remember when I said that Mischief was a psychopomp? Well, that's not too different from saying that he's an angel of death, or a personification of death. Of course, with variations depending on specific cultures, but we don't need to overthink it in this case. We've even seen Mischief holding dead people's souls literally behind his face, so it couldn't be more on the nose. But what I find really interesting is how he had this kind of reputation before his transformation. Why is he the face of death? Why is he called the incorporeal clown? We never see what his actual number is, so we'll never really get an answer. And this is one of those moments where I think that it might just be present-day Mischief remembering things in a warped way, like an unreliable narrator of sorts. This is further supported by the last scene, where the name Percy is revealed, and he turns around to look at it, saying in his usual Mischief voice,
Percy. I thought we changed that.
which to me almost comes off as a nod to us, the viewers. Of course, this could also all be quite literal. Maybe that's how Mischief always sounded, and perhaps he really thought that they changed his stage name. And the ringmaster's whole spiel is just a way to hype up the crowd. This is all probably ambivalent by design, so trying to prove one version over the other is pointless, really. Besides this, we also have some very interesting visual elements here. First of all, someone pointed out how when we enter the foolish house with Percy's face on it, traversing this red twisting tunnel, it's almost as if we were traveling through Mischief's insides, which could also be interpreted to support the idea that this is a memory all inside Mischief. Then we have more sunflower imagery, calling back to Mischief's transformation in episode 5. There's also this specific shot, which is a recreation of the painting Strangest by Polish artist Jan Matejka. The painting depicts a man dressed as a jester slumping in a chair with a heavy expression, while other people seem to be having a ball in the background. Now, the story here is that Strangest was a real court jester in Poland during the Renaissance. At the time, he was respected and known for his ability as a social and political commentator. What happened in the painting is that he's just read a letter announcing that the Polish city of Smolensk has been lost to the Russians. The implication here is that the letter was possibly discarded by one of the noblemen who just went back to the party, while the jester is the only one realizing that this is an omen of disaster for Poland. This could be just a cool visual reference from Umami, but it might also tell us that Mischief knows things about the future that others don't. That perhaps in his warped psyche, he is actually the one that sees things with the most clarity. And it would also fit with his status as a guide. It might be just me overthinking things here or some sort of metaphorical coincidence, but in Western culture there's also a long tradition of the blind prophet archetype, where a character sees things as they really are or starts predicting the future only after quite literally losing his physical ability to see. One of the most famous would be the ancient Greek prophet Tiresias, but with all of this gesture talk I've also automatically thought of Shakespeare's King Lear, with the blinding of Gloucester. And in this sense, perhaps it's not a coincidence that Mischief keeps his eyes closed most of the time. Maybe it symbolizes exactly this difference between sight and insight. It could also have been a random design choice by Umami, but it's cool that it fits so well with this idea. The last two things I'll mention are that we see a woman playing the accordion at one point and she's dressed in the same pink as Percy. She might be someone close to him. And that Dreamland was in fact a real amusement park on Coney Island, open from 1904 to 1911, the year when it burned down. Episode 15 starts with Henrik holding a baby, possibly his daughter, and listening to the radio, where a man is talking about what very much sounds like the effects of nuclear fallout and radiation.
There's no effective method for dislodging the stuff. No known way of neutralizing or destroying it. There is no method of hastening its half-life.
I think that Umami quite literally grabbed a soundbite from some educational film from the 50s or 60s. You can find a lot of them in the Prillinger archive, but all narrators from those times sound exactly the same, so I can't really figure out which film it's from. Of course, what makes this interesting here is that the voice could be referring either to radiation or to cerebral electricity, which makes for another thematic parallel between atom bombs and the Philadelphia experiment. Back to present day, we have Henrik and Mischief cycling through the countryside, and as we can see they're getting very close to Henrik's old house. They stop at a stream that seems to be running right through the road, keep that in mind for later, and Mischief suddenly gets distracted by a frog.
Henrik, look at that. Is that a toad or a frog? I don't know much about amphibians. Ooh! Well, that was short-lived. Looks like he's about to get munched.
As the frog is about to get eaten by the heron, time suddenly stops and Mischief makes one of my favorite puns of the series.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing? I'm not just a basket case, am I?
Something starts levitating out of the stream, and as it morphs into a giant face, everything turns black and white, and it gives a cryptic message.
Static, stoic, frozen. I scan the horizon. Not heaven's skies nor caverns below. I see your home, a state of abandon. There is no judgment, only dangers aglow.
Dad?
Your search continues, as does mine.
Should we wait for you?
A word of warning. Get lost. Don't get lost in time.
So I can't figure out for the life of me what the cardinal directions mean here. If we take those out, the lines seem to be all connected and referring to Henrik. In this land of rotten erosion, you stand alone, static, stoic, frozen. I scan the horizon, not heaven's skies nor caverns below. I see your home, a state of abandon. There is no judgment, only dangers aglow. Your search continues, as does mine. A word of warning, don't get lost in time. It's also kind of a little poem, which is cool. Of course, this is another reference to Henrik being frozen in time, and the final line seems pretty ironic in this sense. But beyond that, I'm not really sure on what to make of it. Umami says that it's cryptic, but it's possible to decipher it to understand exactly what it means. Maybe the cardinal directions are here to say that whatever way Henrik might turn, this is all that awaits him: danger, emptiness, and abandon. I don't know, I'd appreciate your help with this one. While the floating face is speaking, we also see other images. One seems to imply that Henrik has a past in the military. The next has him holding his wife's hand, which slowly gets old and shriveled until it disappears into cerebral electricity. Then there's this shot of him surrounded by dark, dead trees, which again reminded me of Dante and his shadowed forest. and in particular of the Gustave Doré engravings of the Forest of Suicides in Canto 13. Of course, there's also this funny moment of Mischief taking a picture while the face is talking, which he calls a road trip souvenir. This is yet again a moment that seems random and funny, as many of the things that Mischief gets up to are, but this Polaroid will have a greater role in the future, so keep it in mind. At the end, the heron finally munches on the frog, and its little cerebral electricity soul leaves its body. Episode 16 picks up right where the last one ended, with Mischief absorbing the frog's soul and saying,
I just gained a deeper knowledge of amphibians. I really want to be one right now.
This gives us a clue into the whole debate about Mischief's knowledge on things. It would seem that whenever he absorbs something or someone, he also absorbs information about them, or what they know. We finally see Henrik's house and notice that the old tree that's been featured so heavily in his memories is now dead and uprooted and has cerebral electricity covering the exposed roots. Mischief launches himself inside, while Henrik stops by the tree and has a flashback of planting it when his wife was still pregnant. And man, just this shot of Henrik's face while he's reminiscing is so tragic. I am probably not doing a good job at communicating the emotional weight of this project, partly because a lot of it hinges on the amazing, beautiful, immaculate soundtrack, but also because I keep interrupting the flow of the story. I beg you to keep watching it on your own if you haven't yet, because small moments like these hit you like a truck, and I don't want you to miss out on them. So our guy moves on towards the house, in this very somber scene, but here we also get my and many others' single favorite moment of the series, which is deeply unserious.
Ribbit. 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 I'm a frog. And I'm feeling fresh.
Mischief, I would literally kill for you. Something I haven't mentioned about our boy is how much he reminds me of another one of my favorite characters ever, Jake the dog from Adventure Time. The similarities are so striking that I wouldn't be surprised if there was some inspiration taken here, but I can also see it being a coincidence. Both are weird, stretchy creatures that can morph into different shapes, both are characterized by one main striking color, both are wise but also chaotic, irreverent and at times childlike. Both also function as a guide to a human character who wears blue and has a funny hat. Okay, this last part I kinda crammed in there for the laughs, but you see what I mean, right? I've generally always found this to be peak character design, because their shapeshifting allows for virtually infinite possibilities, making them as physically expressive as a character can be. So yeah, 10 out of 10. If I don't mention Adventure Time at least once in my videos, I'm not happy, apparently. The scene focuses on the calendar on the wall, which dates back to November 2015, and is adorned with a picture of Alex Colville's 1954 painting Horse and Train. The painting can be interpreted as an individual opposing progress, mortality and human spirit against cold, unfeeling technology that has the power to destroy anything in its path. Colville himself served in the Second World War as a war artist, documenting the fight, so it's natural to assume that in this vision of progress, he was also probably including the technologies that were used in the war to decimate millions of people. The implication of the painting is also quite obvious and bleak. The horse has no chance to stop the train, it will be mowed down if it keeps going. So perhaps it's an image of obstinance, of a resistance that is commendable but ultimately hopeless. We have another flashback to Henrik's daughter. The two of them are making pierogi, and she remembers her mom telling her stories about the war and about the first time she met Henrik. Henrik fell from the skies when the skies were still blue. A single man in a parachute, either passed out or sleeping. The mom was working as a nurse in the hospital where they brought him and mended his wounds. Then...
When you woke, you looked to her, and the first thing you said was, I love you.
No, I'm not crying. Why do you ask? Once again, there's a few things to unpack. First of all, you might have noticed the color palette being completely different here. Things look normal. Putting together what we know, we can infer that the world of Interface used to look just like ours. The skies were still blue at one point. The Philadelphia incident seems to have completely changed the colors of everything. We have had a few small clues for this. In Mischief's memory, when we see him walking towards the stage, we can briefly see the sky looking normal outside the window. There's also this brief frame when Kami slams into the cross, where the sky suddenly turns back to its original color. Although this might have just been a stylistic choice for the impact. So that's big, but there's also that moment where we see Henrik glide down in his parachute, where we can see a camera and reels on him, which implies that he served as a wartime photographer. I don't know if this is a direct reference to Alex Colville being a war artist, but it's still a pretty interesting parallel. One thing that I want to point out is that there's a bunch of Polish references scattered throughout the series, like Henrik's name, the Strangest painting, and them making pierogi. It's also probable that he was deployed in Poland and that's where he met his wife. Now, I'm assuming that this is because the assistant writer and artist of the series is Karolina Szablewska. Hope I'm not butchering that, which sounds pretty Polish. So, you know, just a cool detail. And also a way to mention that Tomchuk wasn't completely alone when working on the series, and all the people that helped him should also get the credit they deserve. Entry 17 starts with a beautiful 3D shot of an interior as we hear Mischief narrating, starting from "Why do we build?" and talking about how when humans get lost they start walking in circles and then running full speed going nowhere, asking how we can break this circle. Interestingly, somebody pointed out that Mischief uses the pronoun "we" when talking about humans, thus possibly considering himself still human too. Remember what I said about him being gradually humanized throughout the series? I think that's one of our clues. It's also worth pointing out that Tomchuk considers Mischief as a sort of alter ego, in the sense that through him he can ask questions that would seem silly normally.
I see Mischief as almost like an alter ego to myself sometimes, when I'm writing his lines. It's like almost something I would say, it's just kind of like the sillier portion of me that I don't really express in real life,
Mm-hmm. Apparently, vague and philosophical questions like "why do we build?" and the ensuing monologue are perfect examples. These are profound things we might think to ourselves, but perhaps feel that we don't have the necessary instruments to really dig into, or it might even feel pretentious to ask them. I think they end up often being sarcastically thrown into the category of shower thoughts, because most of us are not philosophers. But when you can speak through a character, the perception is obviously very different. Mischief has already shown that he likes to get into profound thoughts, and that's a trait we've accepted, so when he asks such questions, we listen. Here we also get more context on Mischief as Percy the Clown. We get shots of the amusement park and of this building that has a lighthouse lantern on top of it. Then we see that in Interface's world, Dreamland has indeed suffered the same fate as in our world. As the flames rise, Percy stands above them, imitating Caspar David Friedrich wander above a sea of fog. Many seem to think that this shot implies him being responsible for the fire, and it surely does look ominous, but knowing Mischief, I can't see him doing something like this. I think the reference to the painting is the clue here. It's fundamentally a representation of a man gazing into the unknown. This part of Percy's life has fallen apart and now he has an unknown future in front of him, which parallels well with him leaving the world behind and traveling into the unknown after his transformation. All of this is then interposed by another one of Henrik's memories, where his daughter, who's probably talking to her own daughter or granddaughter, says that when she was little and used to go and pick blueberries, her dad, that's Henrik, would say that if it grew dark and she lost her way, she should simply follow the light from the lighthouse on the shore. That is the safe space from which he could come and get her. And so Henrik himself realizes that the lighthouse is where he needs to go to find his way. Also, are you seeing these animations? I know it's cliche to say because that's what half of the comments keep repeating in each new episode, but gosh darn it. Do you remember how the first episode looked? It looked great in its own rough MS Paint way, but I can't deny how much the sense of lighting, space, and depth has improved in later episodes. This one being a perfect example of it. I like how the differences aren't so big that it looks like a different series, but still relevant enough to be noticeable. It's almost like the more depth the story gains, the more depth the animation gains too. And I love to see growth from artists in real time. Finally, in episode 18, we're back to the greetings robotics side of things. We learned that Kami wasn't completely destroyed in the fight with the chef, and that they've been rebuilding an updated version of her. So we get some of the specs for this Kami MK2, and the most interesting part is her abilities. Of her own, she seems to only have autonomy and recognition, but this is where that whole creatures as body parts theme comes into focus. Each creature she absorbed corresponds to a body part, and to a mythological being. we see that the ghost is a hand, and its code name is Shiva, one of the main Hindu deities. Its abilities comprise protection, transformation, destruction. Then we have Lung, which is new to us, and its code name is Gao, a giant wind spirit in 3 different Native American cultures, the Iroquois, Seneca, and Huron people, specifically. We see that there's only traces of this one left, and that its current status is unknown. Some people suggest that this is the floating face spirit we saw in episode 15, which was titled The Winds. I'm unsure of how he could have been absorbed seeing the timeline of events, but I do have a wobbly theory if you want to hear it. Perhaps it happened after episode 7 and before the fight with the chef. The last shot of that one is the Sacaritas flying towards the lighthouse, which I'm assuming is the same lighthouse that's close to Henrik's house, which is itself close to the stream from which the head appeared. When we see the stream for the first time, it looks like it's going right through the road, almost as if something destroyed it. Perhaps this is where their confrontation took place and that detail shows us the damage it did. This could also even imply that Henrik's tree was uprooted because of the fight, and that's why it has traces of cerebral electricity on its roots. But the floating face managed to escape capture, at least partially, and that's why the computer says that there's only trace elements of it. I know that's pretty convoluted and it's crazy if something like that happened off screen, but you gotta admit that it kinda makes sense, right? I don't know, maybe I'm just going full skids over here. Finally, we have the heart, our good old chef, codenamed Akarokamui, which is fittingly a mythological gigantic octopus monster from the Ainu people, an indigenous group from northern Japan and southeast Russia. This one is responsible for intuition and chromatophores, which are the cells that allow certain animals to change their pigment. Afterwards, we see a retinal scan being ran on the chef, and one of the last images he's seen is of Mischief and Henrik standing in his restaurant, who now become explicitly Kami's new target. It's difficult to imagine what body parts these two could represent, although one interesting theory you can find in the comments is that Mischief kinda looks like an uncoiled brain. I don't know why, but I really like that idea from a symbolic point of view, implying that he's like a brain that has been blown up and spaghettified, which just adds to the theory of him representing knowledge but in a chaotic state. The next scene is of a road on which the street lights are being turned on one by one, and before you ask, no, I don't know why the sky looks like that. I think that might just be what the night sky looks like after the Philadelphia experiment. Although it's the first time we see it look this trippy, maybe it's Greetings Robotics utilizing some weird equipment. We cut to the building that Kami dematerialized to absorb the ghost and see Greetings Robotics trucks pull up transporting cerebral electricity. Suddenly, giant hands fly down from the sky as Henrik's great-granddaughter looks on. They take out flat sheets made of CE and plaster them over the destroyed building, giving it a new facade. They even decide to do some more propagandizing with this floating thumb up saying they're keeping communities safe, when they were the ones to destroy the building in the first place. The girl walks down the road as more propaganda can be seen in the background. Here we also see the Sacaritas and a wanted poster for Mischief and Henrik. At the last moment, one of the hands takes its original shape of the ghost and appears in front of the girl. So, did Greetings Robotics basically just take Henrik's great-granddaughter hostage? This all but tells us that a direct confrontation between the two parties is inevitable. Now, the next 2 episodes could genuinely be my favorite of the whole series. This first one starts with Henrik in his old house at night, playing the harmonica. We haven't heard almost a single sound from this guy, and now he's a whole-ass harmonica player. I don't know why, but this just shook me. The whole scene feels so incredibly lonely. Henrik finishes up and lays down to sleep on the couch. And then we have Mischief doing what he does best, being a goofy motherfucker. He jumps towards Henrik in his frog form, and I just love how his face stretches every time he lands. Then he does something that shows us what kind of guy he is better than anything else, in my opinion. He transforms into a blanket and covers Henrik. I mean, just come on, Umami, what kind of emotional roller coaster is this? The next morning, the two set out for the lighthouse, walking along the shore where they can spot an old derelict boat named Permanence, which somebody graffitied to say Impermanence. Bravo, Umami. I see you also like subtle visual storytelling, huh? As Mischief writhes and makes, and here I'm quoting the subtitles, spaghetti noises, he says that this is his quantum entanglement move, which he can only do in secret because if he's observed, the whole system collapses. A cheeky quantum physics joke, I guess. Henrik looks at him and we hear, and once again I'm quoting the subs, a spaghetti catastrophe off screen. Mischief blames him but suddenly gets deep and philosophical once again.
What are we expecting to find over there? Your great-granddaughter won't be waiting. And if she was, would she even recognize you? Would you recognize her? When the facade of flesh and memories change, what makes you so capable? And if you changed like I have, would you recognize yourself?
The writing here is great in general, but the most interesting part for us is when he reveals that if he told Henrik all he knows, he would collapse too. All but confirming what we've been saying for a while, that Mischief knows more than he lets on about Henrik's whole situation. He says that Henrik has to find out things on his own. During this whole speech we also see his great-granddaughter being transported on the giant hand. And then something else, a woman looking in the mirror in which the ghost is reflected. Here we also see a little girl watching her from the doorway. To understand this and to finally get some huge answers, we need to proceed to episode 20. Out of all the episodes in the series, I beg you to watch this one before you continue my video. I would hate to rob you of what is, in my opinion, the heaviest emotional hitter in this whole project. When it comes to visuals, music, writing, voice acting, just everything, this is my favorite out of all of them. It's also a crucial point for the plot that finally answers some big questions and allows us to really get into the finale afterwards. Uomo avvisato, mezzo salvato, as the Italians say. We start with a shot of reeds, then this beautiful spiraling pan towards a room where we can see someone laying in a bed. Henrik stands over the bed looking defeated. Here we start hearing his daughter's voice, saying that while he looks exactly the same on the outside, inside he couldn't be more different, as we get a memory of Henrik pushing her on the swing. We can assume contextually that this is his daughter on her deathbed. Henrik looks at the lighthouse and walks off, as his daughter's soul leaves her body, flies over the house and transforms into a giant hand. Then we watch Mischief slither through a grove of trees as Henrik stands on a bridge looking down. Mischief stops on the riverbank and we see the hand float towards him. As it lands we can see that it's indeed the ghost. And just listen.
Why are you here?
To witness a mortal sin and the consequences of blood guilt. But also, it's supper time.
Mischief has never been as chilling and terrifying as now. Henrik keeps standing on the bridge and we see a car drive towards him, as Mischief's smile grows larger and larger. As you have already figured out, this is Henrik's family in the car, and as they drive towards him, he just stands in the middle of the road waiting to get hit. At the last moment, they swerve and end up in the river, as we already knew. As Henrik uselessly tries to dive in to save them, Mischief makes a deal with his daughter. In exchange for bringing Henrik back from the brink and showing him that there's still hope, he will get all that perish. The episode ends with Henrik sitting with his head in his hands on the riverbank. Maybe I've been more emotional because of personal stuff lately, but this completely demolished me. Umami just sneakily sticks a knife in your side and keeps slowly twisting it. Where to even start? The ghost was Henrik's own daughter all along. Her soul has just transformed into this thing, but it's still her inside, which explains why she saves the girl and why the girl is so comfortable around this monstrous looking thing. Because it's her own grandmother. I think this also helps us make more sense of what she says about Henrik. The two of them suffered opposite fates. Her body died, but her soul lives on in a different form, while Henrik is frozen in time in his own eternal body. But he's been slowly changing inside, to the point he couldn't be more different. But do you understand what happened here? As his daughter died, Henrik decided that he didn't want to live anymore and chose to let himself be ran over. By ridiculous irony of fate, the car he throws himself in front of is the one containing his remaining family, who were probably driving towards his house precisely because they learned of their mother's death. So all along, Henrik knew he was responsible for his own granddaughter and his grandson-in-law's death. But he also assumed that his great-granddaughter was with them at that moment. If he wasn't broken enough already, this was the final nail in the coffin. Perhaps most importantly though, we find out the truth about Mischief. He knew everything all along. He knew what was gonna happen even before the accident, and he didn't lift a finger to stop it. This pretty much confirms the idea of him being an angel of death. He just waits on the sideline to absorb the souls of the deceased. And he is even excited, waiting to witness this mortal sin and the consequences of blood guilt, as he calls them. This and his reward for helping Henrik being all that perish are all pretty cryptic lines. The mortal sin might be literally the indirect murder of Henrik's family by his own actions, and the blood guilt literally the guilt that he feels for it, for killing his own bloodline. But that last line from the daughter is fascinating. It possibly implies that by following Henrik, Mischief will get to absorb the souls of all those who die around them, which plays well with him being perceived as a parasite. But when we look at the present day story, we only ever see him absorb the frog. This is also interesting because how can she exchange these souls for his help? How can she make such a deal? Well, my theory is that creatures like Mischief and the Ghost have some prophetic abilities. They can in some way sense future events, but without knowing exactly what's gonna happen. What I think is happening is that the daughter is referring to something we haven't seen yet. Mischief hasn't yet brought Henrik back and hasn't yet reunited him with his great-granddaughter, so he hasn't yet gotten his reward either, which is pretty damn ominous. Also, this whole sequence, in my opinion, perfectly cements Mischief as a chaotic entity that is beyond good and evil. Once again, he doesn't hurt anyone, but he also doesn't help. He's there to observe and absorb what remains, which, when compared to the way he is now, I think shows us again how much more humanized he's become. Him making that joke about it being supper time supports this. We see a Mischief that's more uncaring here, that only has the objective of consuming more souls, without caring for people's lives. But this is far from the Mischief we see now, especially since he started questioning himself in episode 11. I think we see him genuinely care for Henrik and his quest, and that tiny scene of him transforming into a blanket speaks more than 1,000 words towards this idea. I think this can also help us interpret something about his character, specifically his presumed lies. Him witnessing all of this might make us automatically assume that he was just playing with Henrik, while pretending he didn't know about his great-granddaughter and about what his secret was. But I feel that it's not quite so simple. You see, while to some degree he knew and he had a mission, I think he might have genuinely needed time to understand what Henrik wanted. After all, he told us that he's blind to human desire. So it's not necessarily that he was just being an ass for no reason, but that he literally couldn't connect all of the information he had because he was missing the emotional side of the story. While now he seems to understand this, but outright tells Henrik that he can't reveal all of it, because he would collapse, and so he's just guiding him along to let him find the answers for himself. Again, I might be overthinking things, but that's the whole point here, I guess. He could also just be a bit of a chaotic asshole who's just mostly been manipulating Henrik for his own ends, but I prefer to think that it has more depth than that. One thing that kind of confuses me still is that shot of the ghost in the previous episode. The woman looking in the mirror is Henrik's granddaughter, not his daughter, as far as I can tell. So perhaps this just implies that she saw an apparition of her mom as the ghost right after she died, and maybe that's how she found out and it's why they are driving over there in the first place. Oh, and also that shot of Henrik standing in front of the car is a clear reference to the Shawshank Redemption poster. Didn't know where to include that, but I had to mention it. Episode 21 is another bombshell, but we're basically in the end game now, so that's to be expected. This time we get more revelations on the Mr. Greetings side of the plot. We start with images of a smoldering wasteland with a skull lying on the ground with what looks like pieces of pink clothing all around it. From the sunflower-like window we see in the back, I'm pretty sure that this is the amusement park where Percy/Mischief used to work, which we saw burned down in episode 17. And I think that this skull belongs to the woman we briefly saw in episode 14. It even has a pink splotch on the right cheekbone, which is where she had a little heart painted, although that one was red, so I'm not sure this is relevant. We then cut to an interview of Mr. Greetings, whose first name we learn is Joseph. talking about how the Philadelphia experiment changed the world and what they are doing to revert it. A lot of it is things I've already told you. The important part here is that Greetings' objective is restoration, to bring back the world to how it was before. He says that people born after 1943 don't know that they live in a nightmare, and that it's up to Greetings Robotics to fix everything, and that, quote, they know what the best interests are, which is just a chilling line. What we actually see, I think, is more important than what he says. One of the scenes is of the same child we saw in the museum all the way back in episode 5, where he saw the mischief sunflower. Here he is, ironically enough, planting a sunflower, which we see grow surprisingly fast. When we tie this to what Greetings is saying about the dangers of cerebral electricity, it obviously creates a bit of a contrast. It implies that this new world is fertile, that it's not hostile to life, but quite the opposite. This is accentuated when we see the new Kami Mark II, which, like in Chef's vision, seems to be absorbing all the color around her and leaving all things in black and white, implying that they won't be able to restore things to how they were before, but just change them into something else, perhaps something lifeless and colorless. It all becomes even more on the nose when the pot with the sunflower falls off the boy's window at the end and lands on the sidewalk, in front of which more Greetings trucks are passing, probably preparing for their ultimate goal. The other central scene here is a different look at Mischief's transformation. We see him rising from the ship, in front of the Statue of Liberty, as he releases an impulse which changes the color palette of everything around him. But this doesn't seem to be yet the big change, as while he keeps flying up, we see jet planes approach. They start shooting at him, and it looks like it's right when the bullets make contact that he releases another impulse, but this time powerful enough to cover the entire world. This could be implying, or at least that's how I'm reading it, two main things. First, Mischief himself was the catalyst for the great change that gave us the new world. It's like he himself revealed the cerebral electricity. But second, the fact that the US government is actually responsible for all of it. I mean, they already were because they ran the Philadelphia experiment in the first place, but it seems that on his own, Mischief would have only changed the surrounding area maybe. While after they engaged him and tried to take him down, they released all of that extra energy on the world. So there's something here again about rash and violent solutions bringing forth the opposite of what we'd want. I also want to point out this blink and you'll miss it moment when Mischief looks towards the planes and for one frame his head looks like a skull. Just amazing attention to detail from Umami as always. There's also another great visual reference when Mischief gets shot down, and this time to a Gustave Doré engraving depicting Satan falling from the heavens. The cerebral electricity even takes the shape of wings for a brief moment. Besides being beautiful, it's also yet another clue into the association between Mischief and the devil. So the last thing here is that we also find out that Greetings was also present on the USS Eldridge during the experiment. While he seemingly did come out of it unscathed, he also had to witness the grotesque deaths of his crewmates being fused into the hull of the ship and torn to shreds. After Mischief falls down into the water and things seem to have calmed down, he just stares in disbelief at the sky and sun in their new unnatural shade, and the last thing he witnesses is this. All of it gives us more insight into his motivations. While we can perceive him as being misguided, and we've never seen the so-called dark effects of cerebral electricity, he witnessed firsthand its devastating potential. He was quite literally traumatized by the horrifying deaths of his crew, and on top of that, looked right into the eyes of a gigantic living monster. I can kinda understand why he would take the stance he takes now, although it is still pretty terrifying how he and many others are captured in this idea.
The vast majority is already on board. They welcome these changes. They have faith in us. World governments have faith in us. We know what the best interests are.
In episode 22, we have Mischief and Henrik finally reaching the lighthouse, which is emanating pulses of cerebral electricity that sounds like a bell ringing. Something interesting that a viewer mentions in a comment liked by Umami is that this is the same sound we can hear at times at the start of other episodes, almost as if the lighthouse was beckoning Henrik all along throughout the series. Maybe this was intended, maybe not, it's still a cool detail. The door opens on its own and Henrik takes the stairs while Mischief flies as a bird once again. Here he starts listing a number of dates and commenting on them.
The year was 1911. Two comedians took a bow. 54 years too soon.
So this is a reference to Edward Hopper's last painting titled Two Comedians from 1965, which depicts him and his wife Jo on stage, dressed in costumes, taking one final bow. This was a sort of farewell piece by the painter, as both of them were in their 80s and sick. And in fact, Hopper died less than 2 years after the painting, and Jo the year after that. This reference and the image here of Mischief and the accordion woman together in the amusement park were my main clues to think that these two were, perhaps, lovers. We can also notice the ringmaster looking angrily at the two of them. This has made some people think that there could have been a love triangle kind of situation here, which might have led to the fire being set by one of them after things went sour. If we add this to the details of Percy thinking that they decided on a new name and the ringmaster talking about taming him, I can kinda see them having some sort of conflict behind the scenes. Seeing as the two comedians take a bow, it might also be implying that the two of them wanted to leave the amusement park. And that was what sparked the ringmaster's rage. In any case, we can only speculate, and I love how little we're given. It's almost like this memory, being so old, leaves us with most of the pieces missing and just a few little clues to go on. Somebody in the comments also pointed out that 1964 was Steeplechase Park's last season and the property was sold the next year. Apparently this was the last of the classic Coney Island parks, while Dreamland, where Percy worked, burned down in 1911, so 54 years before the end of what the commenter calls the classic Coney Island. Not sure if this is a coincidence, but either way it fits well. Then we have
1943. Employers shot me down. I've already told you that one.
This is a pretty clear reference to the army shooting Mischief out of the sky after the experiment went wrong. Then
1946. The Demon Core struck twice. Will it strike once more?
So here, the Demon Core was a sphere made of a plutonium-gallium alloy that was intended for use during the third atomic bomb experiment in the Manhattan Project. During its testing in Los Alamos, it caused two accidents, one in 45 and another in 46, which caused two physicists, first Harry Daghlian and then Louis Slotin, to die of acute radiation poisoning. Then there's
1954. The apple was a ruse.
This one is stranger, because it's probably in reference to Alan Turing's death. His housekeeper found him dead in his bed and the postmortem revealed that it was due to cyanide poisoning. When he was found, there was a half-eaten apple beside his bed, so some people suggested that the apple was poisoned and the death was ruled a suicide. Afterwards, different people questioned this verdict, saying that Turing didn't seem suicidal and that he probably died of an accidental inhalation of cyanide from an apparatus he had in his office. Others even suggested that he was murdered by British intelligence. Either way, it makes sense for the apple being a ruse, as Mischief says. Next we have
1961. My soul. Where are you? Do you hear me? I will wander with you and ascend to my solitude.
This is the year in which renowned psychologist Carl Jung died, and this quote is from his Red Book, or Liber Novus, a strange diary of sorts that he kept throughout his life and was published long after his death. As Mischief says this, we also fittingly see Henrik caressing the beacon of the lighthouse, in which departed souls are contained, morphing as usual in the cerebral electricity, and there seems to be a deliberate focus on his wedding ring. This could be a moment in which Henrik is thinking of his wife, who might be in there with everyone else, but also literally about his own lost and wandering soul. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Red Book. In fact, we're not going to talk about the Red Book at all. I'm a total layman when it comes to Jung, and one of the things I know is that the Red Book is quite unorthodox and trippy, and not easy to parse. I don't want to embarrass myself by half-assing it, and I'm sure others have already done a good job at it on this platform. It is safe to say that there is probably some influence of Jung's writings on interface. I've even commented about the use of archetypes, but I can't tell you how deep these references really go. After this, Mischief asks one final question.
Henrik, when was it for you?
And of course it's connected to all the previous references. So the obvious thing that ties all of them together is death. But it's not just that. Hopper, Daglin and Slaughton, Turing, Jung, these were all also important people. They all in their way contributed something to art or science. But Mischief also mentions himself, and while it is true that in this world he changed reality, it doesn't really fit with what the others mentioned did. Maybe he is literally just talking about death, saying that it came for all of them, and asking when it happened to Henrik. It's definitely one of the more cryptic passages in my opinion, and there are different ways in which you could read it. Looking at that Jung quote, he might even be talking about the loss of the soul, not just mere death, implying that Mischief himself lost his soul during the accident and that Henrik lost it too when he got changed. But also you could read this as people who were so driven by their work that in one way or another it ended up killing them. Perhaps Henrik was also such a driven photographer that it led him to that lethal position at the atom bomb test. But then Mischief including himself here wouldn't make too much sense. Although there could be a pretty easy reference to Icarus flying too close to the sun here, but it seems a bit on the nose. So I'm not sure. While I think that most of Interface can be explained, I'm not gonna deny that some of the passages are still a bit enigmatic. I'm sure that they have a solution, but I might need your help to find it. Anyway, the episode ends with Henrik seemingly looking at the sun on the horizon, and after a moment we realize that it's actually the Saccharidus approaching. It starts opening up and transforming in this beautifully animated 3D sequence. We see colored shapes and tentacles made of cerebral electricity coming out of it. As Henrik looks on, hands made of cerebral electricity start coming out of the beacon and slowly grasping at him, and his daughter's voice can be heard calling out to him. Henrik's eyes and the whole screen fill with static. Someone pointed out that it doesn't seem like the hands want to harm him, but it almost looks like they're caressing him. The description says that the lighthouse has been repurposed and asks, is it a trap? Well, we'll find out soon enough. So, before we get to the two big final episodes, there's this short entry that seemed like a shitpost, but has been put in the official Interface playlist, so most people consider it canon at this point. It's just our boy Mischief taking a selfie video saying that everything's fine, that he's just hanging out with his buddy Henrik, and that he must be tripping balls on some mushrooms.
Just hanging out here at the top of a lighthouse with my good buddy Henrik. Oh god, what's wrong with his eyes? Looks like he's tripping balls.
He shows us the Saccharidus and keeps telling us that there's no need to send help, that everything's under control, while he keeps winking with his left eye. It's just hilarious to think that while Henrik's fighting with the demons of his past, Mischief is just doing like a little Instagram live or some shit to chat with his fans. I've also never commented on this, but the single best thing about Mischief's design, in my opinion, is how he sometimes just scrunches his nose. It just reminds me of a bunny or a dog, and adds like 10 points of cuteness to his eldritch little face. Now we're in it. Episode 23. This time we immediately begin with a great visual reference to a famous painting by Giorgio de Chirico, titled Piazza d'Italia, one of his many pieces on the so-called metaphysical spaces. Barren places of absence in which time seems to stand still, which is very fitting, as if we read the description we find out that these scenes take place in the simulation generated by the brain of the mechanical Saccharidus. We already knew that the cerebral electricity connects all things, so it makes sense that when Henrik started, as Mischief says, tripping balls, he was actually connected to the Saccharidus through the CE. You'll also notice that the statue at the center of the original painting has been replaced with a giant octopus holding a cube. Could this be our friend Chef, now frozen in place like a piece of marble? An interesting aspect of how the sequence was made is also the sun so quickly changing its direction, which just makes everything feel even more surreal. Henrik then shows up smoking a cigarette and hears a train approaching. And this might be a visual reference to the film by the brothers Lumière, The Arrival of a Train at La Ciotat. Mr. Greetings comes out from behind the building and holds out a hand to Henrik.
Greetings, Henrik.
Isn't it amazing that he can both tell someone his name and greet them in just one word? I bet Umami was waiting all this time just to use this little pun. I also love how the train and the two men shaking hands are both in the Kiriko painting. The two board the train and Greetings points out that Henrik is facing the back of it, and that in this way he'll only see his past. But when Henrik doesn't reply, he says, "The past it is." The two stop to look at another, this time physical, representation of the Dali painting of the new man. But as the veil is being lifted, it also looks more like a reference to Sunrise by the Ocean by Vladimir Kush. Henrik walks towards a camera and starts looking at the giant egg through the viewfinder, while Greetings asks him what the origin of his problem is, of his dissociation from reality. As he tells him to focus, that's what he literally does with the camera. He adjusts the focus. Do you see why I ended up going almost frame by frame on this stuff, right? Like, I swear I wanted to go through the second part much quicker and tell you the gist, but there are just so many little moments that are worth pointing out, so many things that have double meanings or further implications. It's just way too dense to breeze through. Anyways, Greetings starts telling Henrik about how all, quote, haunted souls remain on Earth, that they can't go the way they came, and asks him his reason for staying. We also see the giant egg breaking to reveal a brain filled with cerebral electricity. But this whole scene is also obviously a recreation of Henrik's death during the tumbler snapper tests. We see him being destroyed all the way to his skeleton, but immediately regenerating. So fundamentally what Greetings reveals to us is that complicity in war, the advancement of destruction, the constant distancing between man and nature are the weights that the men of the past carry. Both him and Henrik are such men, but Greetings says he's changed, realizing that he needs to enact a great reversal. But he can't do it on his own. For this, he needs Henrik. He needs the man of the past who refuses to go forward, because he balances them out. He needs Henrik to join them in this endeavor, to agree with them by pushing a red button inside the lighthouse. By doing so, he can live on forever in this simulation, which we find out is the titular interface, where he can really keep time at a standstill and be reunited with the consciousnesses of his family, basically achieving what he wanted for so long. While he's telling him this, we see many images. One is of a big industrial city, representing how far cities have grown and modernized while also polluting more and more. We then see Kami inside of a skyscraper, in a shot that might be a reference to the ending of Fight Club. She takes off her mask and as an airplane flies towards the building, she bows. So, 9/11 reference out of nowhere over here. Now, this happens right as Greetings says that they had to, quote, change. And I think, but take it with a grain of salt, that the scene implies their secret involvement in the Twin Towers attacks and probably other terroristic attacks too. Literal inside jobs that would then give them reason to rebuild. And also propagandize their corporation while at the same time winning the consensus of the governments, which is what they now have, according to Greetings. Basically, this also implies that they need people to agree with their goals for the great change to take effect. As Greetings tries to convince Henrik, he takes him to a flower field in front of his house, where he finally sees his daughter and runs to embrace her. When she starts crying though, we see that her tears are made of cerebral electricity. Now, why would his daughter appear and not everyone else? Why not his wife? Well, remember that his daughter, in the form of the ghost, was absorbed by the Sakuritis, and Greetings says that haunted souls remain in this world. I think that the implication is that the rest of the family, or at least his wife, possibly moved on, and that Henrik won't actually find them in the cerebral electricity simulation, so Greetings is manipulating him just like he manipulated the whole world. Greetings also tells Henrik to give up the devil that haunts him, saying that he's preying on him, that in his eyes there is chaos unknown, that he should be afraid of him. And who is the little devil we all know and love? Well, it's Mischief, obviously. Greetings says that Henrik needs to cast him to the light, and that if he's not afraid of him, he's been fooled. Some people took this as a confirmation of Mischief's evil intentions, of him being the devil he was visually implied to be. But don't you see what's happening? Greetings is obviously manipulating Henrik just like Mischief did. But last we saw him, Mischief actually told Henrik that he needed to see the truth for himself, while Greetings is creating this illusion. In a sense, Henrik has been a pawn in both of their schemes all this time. But I believe that Mischief has genuinely become his friend, so I don't believe that his point is tricking him anymore. But whatever Mischief wants, it obviously goes in the face of Greetings Robotics' plans, and the only one who could give them mischief by betraying him is Henrik. Throughout this section, there are also a few visual clues that tell us that Mischief is in some way giving signals to Henrik inside the interface. For example, we see another recreation of the horse and train painting by Colville. This time the horse is pink and runs towards the greetings train. At the last moment though, as Henrik observes through the window, it veers to the side and dodges the train. Two then jump into the sky and grow wings. Later, when Henrik meets his daughter, we see a pink dragonfly pass in front of them. And at the end, as Henrik gets off from the train at another station, a clock shaped like a sun with Mischief's face in the middle hangs on the wall. A clock which, by the way, points to 4:35. Someone in the comments said that it could be a reference to a Bible verse. Specifically, they point to Mark 4:35. One day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." Umami liked this comment, so they could be onto something. But there's also a verse in Luke that could fit. "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out without injuring him. The implication here is that Mischief is like a demon possessing Henrik, and Greetings is trying to throw him out. There was also a great reference to the Magritte painting Golconda, which I didn't mention, and it might be there to indicate that Henrik is but one of many men of the past, or seeing that this is right when Greetings is telling him that there are no multiverses and infinite choices but only one that he has to make. It might just be a cool visual juxtaposition. At the end, Henrik stands at the station and holds out two photographs we've already seen before. One is that of his family, and the other is the one Mischief snapped of the floating face. So if you were confused up to this point, this is basically the scene that represents everything in a neat way. Henrik has to make a choice. Will he betray Mischief, allowing Greetings Robotics to have all the power they need to change the world, while he stays inside the simulation of the interface, stuck in the memories of his family, remaining the man of the past he always was? Or will he heed the words of the floating face, "Don't get lost in time," and finally decide to move on, accepting the future and keep on living with his great-granddaughter for the time being, while ruining Greetings' plans? Once again, here we see that Mischief either knew or expected how things would turn out, and that's why he took that picture all the way back in episode 15. He knew that there could be some risk that Henrik might remain stuck in the past and that the cryptic message from the floating face would come in useful at that moment. At this point, I'd say let's just take on the last episode and comment on everything when we finally have all of it finished. Interface's epilogue starts with Mr. Greetings' death. He is administered a cocktail of drugs which somebody in the comments pointed out is the same that was used for lethal injections. As his heart rate flatlines, we see the Saccharitis start to change shape. So this probably means that all the time Greetings has been speaking to Henrik, he was actually dead, and has uploaded himself to the interface and the Saccharitis' brain. Then it's nighttime, and we pan to the top of the lighthouse where Mischief has morphed into a ringing phone and Henrik is lying on the ground. From the windows, we also see a grey giant humanoid body. As Mischief often does, he starts getting all philosophical, saying that when humans first gaze upon the night sky, they didn't see stars, but titans. He's referring to the constellations in which we saw and still to this day see shapes. And he mentions specifically a hand, a lung, a heart, an altar. Here we also see what the Saccharitis has turned into. It grew arms and legs and now basically looks like the orang meme. I'm sorry if I ruined the vibe. Henrik wakes up, picks up the receiver, and Mischief asks what came first, man or God, and adds that if man came first, then they'll make a god, and that by doing so, they'll become one. He finally adds,
"Every choice you make is a sacrifice."
And I want you to put a pin in that because for me that's one of the absolutely central points of Interface. Henrik hovers his hand over the red button, but instead presses Mischief's nose, prompting him to morph onto him again. As his daughter and great-granddaughter observe the scene, the giant baby Saccharitis moves to grab the lighthouse. Our two boys skedaddle out of there and evade an attack from a ghost hand. The Saccharitis then drinks the cerebral electricity from the lighthouse like it's a baby bottle, but that doesn't seem to satisfy him. After dodging another attack, Mischief speaks through Henrik's mouth.
"So it follows. If your choice is an illusion, so too is your sacrifice."
And then Mischief gets expelled quite disgustingly and turns into an apple. And remember, the apple was a ruse. His daughter then speaks, and this is one of the most chilling moments in the series, because it's pretty obvious that it's not really her.
Don't make us force your hand. You can join us willingly, in peace. smile. Aren't you happy to see your great-grandfather?
Henrik sees through this, so he throws mischief at her, who grabs at her face, taking off the mask and revealing Kami behind it. As he holds the mask, he repeats the same words he had told Henrik, that seeing the world through her eyes, it looks no different to him. Then adds that the mask only works one way, one can see out but not in. So let's stop for a moment. You might have already noticed that this episode has fully embraced the existential elements that were peppered throughout the series. What I think Mischief means each time he says that line of "the world looks no different to me" is that his view is somehow objective? Maybe that's not the right word, but it's clear that he sees things differently. What really changes the outlook on the world is not how the world itself looks, but how the eyes of the person looking perceive it. Both Henrik and Greetings/Kami were moved by desire. A desire to stop time, to rewind it, to move it forward, to cleanse its mistakes. It doesn't matter, because all of these points of view were just an illusion. The apple was always in front of their faces, and the apple was a ruse. None of them could look at the world for what it was. All of them wanted to either be a catalyst for change or to prevent it. Mischief's chaos ends up being the power that breaks this ruse. He is beyond good and evil because he acts like a force of nature, and perhaps, but this is just my reading of it, what humanity he has left inside was liberated after his change, so to speak, and is having, dare I say, fun in this freedom? Is he acting like a sort of equalizing force in the world, or is there more to it? As Mischief stands in front of Kami, it attacks him, splitting her own mask in half, which symbolically could be implying that she just destroyed her own illusion. This also obviously is another chance for Mischief to make a pun.
All this talk and now I have a splitting headache.
As arms made of cerebral electricity start to come out of Mischief, Kami begins a self-destruction protocol. It's like this new unobstructed view is too much for her to take. Here, another hexadecimal cipher message appears. Unfortunately, it's been resolved in the comments. It reads, "What you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here." This was a message featured on posters found in Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project, reminding everyone there of the absolute secrecy of their work. And then the kanji shi, which means death in Japanese. As Kami finally blows up, it also tears Mischief to pieces. And her guy is straight up dead. Just like that. Henrik even checks his pulse, which is the first time I thought he might actually be stupid because, bro, you're checking the pulse of a decapitated head. As this is happening, the giant Sakuratus baby is just standing there crying, probably because it's still hungry. Henrik uses his hat to cover Mischief's face, and that's it. Come on, did you really think that it would be that easy?
Musty. And nutritious? Now I'm nutritious.
It would take more than that to get rid of this little pest. Now he has become a perfectly nutritious snack for the big hungry baby, and as it starts running towards them, he tells Henrik and his great-granddaughter to get out of there. So baby boy grabs Apple Mischief and straight up munches on him, which seems to give him an indigestion strong enough to drop him. It falls into the water in a stupor and just lays there, slowly closing its eyes. And this time Mischief doesn't make a surprise comeback. This time, that's really it. The series ends with shots of cities, streets, factories, just quiet landscapes, and at the very end finally pans to Henrik and the girl sitting together in a diner. And the credits roll. So that was the epilogue of Interface. No, there's no plot twist, I'm not joshing you around or anything like that. Mischief gets eaten and apparently destroys the Sakuratus, Henrik is reunited with his great-granddaughter, and it all ends on a visual reference to Hopper's renowned painting Nighthawks. Unless you watch Safe Mode. If Interface is a 10 out of 10, Safe Mode is an 11 out of 10. I have no idea why it's doing less views than Interface. I mean, at the moment of writing this, the newest episode sits at just 38k views, which is an actual affront to creativity. If I can tell you to do one thing after you watch this video is to watch Safe Mode, because everything great about Interface has basically been improved in that one. And yes, it is connected to Interface, but more on that in a moment. So what to even say at this point? What seemed like a silly shitpost in episode 1 has become one of the most interesting and existential pieces of art that you can find on this platform. Nay, that you can find in all of animation. Hopefully I've added most of the necessary comments throughout the video and I don't need to recap them right now, but I want to give you my final thoughts. In one of the interviews I've used for this video, Tomchuk comments on his love for sci-fi media because it often asks big existential questions like why are we here? And that he sometimes finds it hard to empathize with the problems we have on Earth right now.
It's something to do with the fact that I like watching sci-fi movies so much. It's like I'm always trying to figure out what's the purpose of why we're here, you know? And I feel like sci-fi movies they're not just like cool, you know, machine movies and rockets and stuff. I feel a lot of the good ones are about like, you know, the fact that we're still on there's still a space with like trillions of stuff out there we don't even understand yet, right? You know, I'm always thinking about like what is like I don't know, it just I have a hard time like empathizing with the problems that we have on Earth sometimes when you think about like the fact that we're just basically bacteria on like a rock, you know, in the grand scheme of things.
It is not surprising then that by the end, Interface dives so hard into the existential side of things. We can find so many different questions here, like the difference between the real world and the simulation, the meaning of illusions and the illusion of meaning in our choices, the idea of things being fated to happen in a certain way or our choices being preordained, making them non-choices, basically. It is not clear by the end of it all who really won, or if there was even anything to win at all. Greetings dies and is uploaded to the interface, and while he still tries to influence reality, we see that it doesn't really work. But he already had his doubts in the first place, so when another man of the past, just like he technically is, refuses to cooperate in his goals, I think that it somewhat shatters his views. Henrik was constantly running towards death, but here at the end he decides to keep on living. Even though this probably means that he will witness his great-granddaughter and her future family, if she'll ever have one, once again die like the rest. I think it would be wrong to say that he embraced his being at the end, and using the Hopper painting, which many say has an accentuated sense of loneliness and isolation, even though Hopper said that it didn't seem particularly lonely to him, is very telling in this sense. Henrik has moved on mentally for now, but at the price of accepting his status as an immortal being. Perhaps he's become more similar to Mischief than we thought and accepted that he is now something beyond human. We could even dare to imagine that he'll also take on a sort of guide/angel of death role for his family, helping them to move on while he stays back. This is all my personal speculation obviously, so take it all with a grain of salt. While Mischief just got what he wanted. He helped Henrik come back, and the Sakuritis contains all that perish, and that's where he is right now. His mission is over in this story, so he moves on to a new one. Once again, I'd like to stress how nothing by the end is really resolved one way or the other. Things just happen the way they had to, and nobody really has a clear happy or tragic ending. Mischief basically just showed up to tell everyone that they're wrong and that they're mere fools. While I do believe in the idea of Mischief being a sort of force of nature acting to rebalance everything, I also don't want that to exclude his humanity. I don't think he just does things with no goal, I just think that his goal is understanding and discovering. It's not exactly clear what his goal is inside the interface, although you should check out safe mode for clues into that, and the simple conclusion would be that he wants all the souls trapped in there for himself. But come on, we've seen him interact with people, he's too fascinated by them, he seems too interested in philosophical debates for that, and he might just find his match inside the simulation. No spoilers. Besides all of that, I want to point out how all the other themes and theories brought up throughout the show, like evolution, transhumanism, paradigm shifts, the afterlife, hubris, are not made irrelevant by the end. They're still very much part of Interface's story. It's just that at some point, the stakes become so high that they end up seeming almost silly. What I personally read in Tomchuk's artistic decisions here is the idea that none of those points being resolved one way or the other would have made for a satisfying conclusion, and that all of them, when looked at from a more existential point of view, seems so insignificant. Even when these characters' story arcs end, they really just keep going. There's always something new, always something happening and changing. Until one reaches total non-existence, they'll be constantly subject to some form of journey. And the fascinating part is that journey in itself. And don't you dare say that it sounds like something out of a fortune cookie, cause I will hurt you. I guess for me that's the point of seeing Mischief as a sort of alter ego. Mischief has fun in observing everything that happens, whether it be good or tragic, and he doesn't remain stuck in one place. He's not afraid of change because he knows change is natural. He also has fun in putting people in front of their own illusions, perhaps because, in a sense, each time one's illusions shatter, they become just a bit more similar to him, just a bit freer. One other big theme we can point to underlying all of it is that of people creating or playing God in one way or another. It is especially made evident by Mischief's monologue at the lighthouse. I see this as man being somewhere in the middle between a divine being with all the answers and a mere animal with no complex consciousness. It's already been said many times, but we have this innate sense of the divine inside of us. We can ask great questions, we can see and feel things we can't explain, but we're missing the knowledge necessary to answer all of it. A knowledge that only a superior being could have. And obviously, having all of these unanswered questions is frustrating for us. Before, we used to see titans in the sky and accepted the inherent magic of the world. Now, after our knowledge evolved, we see the stars and the physicality of the world. I think implying that either one of those modes of being is the better one would be silly, but of course they might lead to different behaviors from us. In the first instance, we might sacrifice things on the altar to these gods and be subjected to nature's power. In the other, we might want to dominate and take this power for ourselves, in the delusion that we can achieve everything. Both will change our point of view on the world, and both would be illusions. Man overstepping his boundaries, especially by justifying it as something for the greater good of humanity, too often ends in tragedy. The Industrial Revolution, the atomic bomb, computers, the internet, social media, AI, space exploration, all of it in one way or another takes us one step further in the evolution of knowledge. But as we've already pointed out, it also always brings consequences that we're not ready to face yet. But none of it can really be stopped. This is just the way we are, and change is inevitable. So one response to that would be to just observe it all, good or bad, and think, look at us go. Aren't we funny things? So yeah, that was my longest video yet. I am in pain. I am actually going insane right now. Jesus, I've been recording like this is okay, coming to you live from the Moldered studio. I've been recording for let me just check very quickly. 187 minutes. How do other people do this? I don't know. Anyway, I hope it was worth it by the end. As always, please check out Umami's work, but especially go and check out his newest running series, Safe Mode, because it is sort of a sequel to Interface taking place inside of the simulation. We have a new protagonist, Smear, going on a similar winding journey of self-discovery and existential questions. We see some familiar faces come back in it, and the visual style is just absolutely stunning. Don't miss out, please. I hope all of this has been at least somewhat coherent. I hope that my theories weren't too crazy and that all in all this has been enjoyable for you. I put a lot of work into it and I would appreciate it a lot if you left a comment with your thoughts and shared the video around. With that said, I'm gonna have to lay down for a while. Goodbye and see you, Space Tagliatelle.